Well, hello, readers by eyes and by ears. I hope you are excited, but also just as devastated as I am. Anyway, welcome back to my channel where we are currently, but about to not be currently, reading Peerless Volume 4, also known as Wu Shuang by Meng Xi Shi. And today, we are finishing it out. Oh my god. 71 pages left of this beautiful glory, and I'm sad. Yeah, I'm sad. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Chapter 147. The two Tsway guards had anticipated a room filled with gold and silver. Instead, numerous paintings adorned the walls of the small chamber, and several rolled-up scrolls lay scattered across the floor and table. But Tsway Boo-qoo was stunned for another reason. He recognized the subject of the paintings. Standing with her head turned coyly over her shoulder, the upper half of her body bare. Half sprawled on the bed, holding her chest and partially exposed. Draped in fluttering gauzy fabric, the flesh underneath just barely discernible. These weren't like Li Yan's vulgar and explicit paintings. The woman gazed from the paintings with half-lidded eyes, or looked out over a fan, smiling warmly. From the tender beauty of a young girl to the elegance of a married woman, the paintings showed the same subject across the years in various styles. The painter had truly captured her charm, each frown and smile vividly portrayed. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't need to wait for Yang Yuan to confirm. He already knew the subject's identity. "I didn't realize you shared such a past with Princess Leping." Tsway Boo-qoo glanced at Yang Yuan, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. "Although, I did think of the princess's kept man when I saw you." Yang Yuan sat upright with his eyes closed, feigning the inability to hear or speak. He was powerless to stop this, so his only option was to maintain silence. The Tsway guards exchanged uneasy glances, a chill creeping up their spines. The secrets of the royal palace were not something they should be privy to. Yet Tsway Boo-qoo didn't allow them to leave. He pointed at the bricks behind them. "Crack open that wall with your blades." A spasm crossed Yang Yuan's face. He opened his eyes and finally stopped pretending to be mute. "How did you know?" The two Tsway guards obeyed. Their sharp blades scraped the wall, sending white powder fluttering down and quickly revealing a golden beam beneath. "Lord Chief, continue." Blades scraped along the crack again, widening it in all directions. In moments, they had unearthed a surprising discovery. Behind the thin layer of flour paste lay a solid wall of shimmering gold bricks, stacked from floor to ceiling. It was only a single wall, but it was astonishing to behold. "There's a strange crevice in the corner here," one of the Tsway guards exclaimed. He pressed his fingers into the crevice and slowly pried it open. Bit by bit, the wall parted to reveal a hidden passage leading to a brightly illuminated hall. Flickering candlelight hinted at an exit at the far end. Tsway Boo-qoo gasped in astonishment. "Commandery Governor Yang, your secret chambers are far more impressive than those of the former mogul of the Northwest, Duan Chi-hu. Someone ought to have brought that country bumpkin here to witness the splendor of the imperial family." "How dare you slander the Yang family?" shouted Yang Yuan in anger. "You're just the dog my aunt raised—" "Ah!" A Tsway guard had kicked him to the ground and began to beat him mercilessly. Within just a few blows, his nose was bruised and his face was swollen. Tsway Boo-qoo pretended not to notice, choosing instead to admire the golden wall. He gazed at it intently, as if flowers might bloom from its gilded surface. As Yang Yuan's shout devolved into pitiful wails, he turned back in feigned surprise. "Commandery Governor Yang, despite your embezzlement of the court's grain, your disregard for human life, and your desecration of the princess, our nation has laws to address such crimes. You can continue to punish yourself like this, but the Ministry of Justice will not plead for mercy on your behalf before His Majesty." Yang Yuan no longer tried to speak. "Lord Chief, the passage leads above ground to a courtyard with a woman and 2 mute servants inside." The Tsway Yue guard who had gone to investigate quickly returned with the woman in tow. She was dressed in lavish robes and appeared about 20 years old. Her figure was graceful and her face like a painting, though her panicked expression somewhat dulled her beauty. As soon as Tsway Boo-qoo laid eyes on her, a smile spread across his face. "Commandery Governor Yang, it seems that being stationed so far from the eyes of the Emperor has enabled you to become as carefree as an immortal." The woman bore an unmistakable likeness to the young Princess Leping. "Now can you make them leave?" Yang Yuan asked hoarsely. Tsway Boo-qoo waved his hand, and the Tsway Yue guards escorted the woman out of the chamber. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and helplessness, and she glanced repeatedly over at Yang Yuan, who didn't spare her a single glance. "Speak." Tsway Boo-qoo adjusted the collar of his cloak and settled into a cross-legged seat on the floor. With his hands and legs tightly bound, Yang Yuan didn't have a similar luxury. He could barely sit or stand, and was forced to lean uncomfortably against the wall. "What do you want me to say?" he said icily. "You've seen everything. What more is there?" "I have no interest in whether your fascination with Princess Leping is one-sided or mutual. As for the embezzlement, that matter will be dealt with by the Ministry of Justice in the Imperial Censorate. What I truly wish to understand is your connection to the 13 floors of Yunhai." "If I tell you, what will you give me in return?" Yang Yuan asked, attempting to bargain. The corner of Tsway Boo-qoo's mouth quirked up. "I'll burn all the paintings here and let that woman go. What happened in this chamber will remain between us." A clandestine relationship between 2 cousins in the Yang family could never see the light of day, especially since one of them was a princess and the empress of the previous dynasty. "I've not seen the princess since I took office in Guangqian Commandery in the first year of the Kai Huang era," Yang Yuan returned defensively. "These paintings don't prove anything." Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. "And what about the woman outside? And the princess's former retainer? The emperor and empress have both seen him. What will they think, I wonder? According to law, as a Yang, you'd normally face merely exile for your crimes here. But should they discover the truth, you can forget keeping your life." "If that's true, then they won't let you escape either," Yang Yuan retorted. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed into his hand. "If Commandery Governor refuses to speak, perhaps I should ask someone else. County Lieutenant Wu Yi and your associates must know something." With that, he made to rise. "Wait!" Yang Yuan blurted. Tsway Boo-qoo looked back. With a hint of reluctance, Yang Yuan continued. "I only intended to sell the grain for a little profit. I never plotted rebellion. The idea of donating grain for tax exemptions was suggested to me by a man named Xiao." Now that he'd been exposed, it was only natural that he'd push all the blame onto the 13 floors of Yunhai. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't attempt to determine whether or not this was true. Instead, he simply asked, "What was his name? Why did you believe him?" Lord Xiao had come to Guangqian Commandery 3 years prior, whereupon he had met the recently promoted Yang Yuan through the Li family's connections. Knowing Yang Yuan had a fondness for wealth, Lord Xiao gave him 2 gold Buddha statues and quickly forged a friendship with him. Then he offered several crafty ideas to the ambitious new official. Yang Yuan gradually began to view Lord Xiao as a clever and resourceful ally, and the two grew even closer. Lord Xiao had claimed to be a southerner, traveling back and forth across the Yangtze River to trade spices. Yang Yuan knew the Xiao were a major clan in the southern dynasty, but chose not to probe further. After all, Lord Xiao's numerous trips brought him significant profits. But even this wasn't enough to quench Yang Yuan's appetite for riches. He next set his sights on the court's granaries. Based on what he'd heard so far, Tsway Boo-qoo was almost certain this Lord Xiao was Xiao Lü himself. 3 years ago, as the 13 floors of Yunhai sought to expand their influence, it would have required extensive provisions and financial support. Xiao Lü had bribed Yang Yuan with 2 gold Buddhas but reaped even greater benefits from the tax exemption policy. Tsway Boo-qoo knew without asking that the taxes exempted by the imperial court over the past 2 years had found their way into the pockets of local landlords. Xiao Lü must have also had a hand in that, gaining even more significant profits. If they had stopped there instead of misappropriating the relief grain issued by the court, or if Zhongqing had been slightly less earnest, their operation might have continued undisturbed. After this year's flood, it was Lord Xiao who encouraged me to pocket all the grain. Cui Buqu raised a hand to interrupt him. That's not true. Yang Yuan was confused. What's not true? I don't believe Lord Xiao is the type to be so short-sighted. He's already reaped substantial gains from you and understands not to bite off more than he can chew. Acting cautiously allows one to achieve much more in the long run. In your impatience to snatch up all the grain, you left nothing for the flood victims. That's what gave you away. Even Huang Lue realized the dire consequences and chose to discreetly provide us with information rather than take the fall. Looking at Yang Yuan, Tsway Boo-qoo said slowly, I advise you to be honest. Don't think you can escape judgment simply because Lord Xiao isn't here. Was this your idea or his? Yang Yuan's eyes flickered. He refused to meet Tsway Boo-qoo's gaze. Of course it was his idea. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. Commandery Governor Yang, Lord Xiao is from the 13 floors of Yuanhai. He's a man brimming with ambition and ulterior motives. He cooperated with you for 2 years because he saw long-term benefit for himself. It was never for some paltry relief grain. If you hadn't fallen out with him, you wouldn't have been so easily caught. Lord Xiao is skilled enough to hold his own against me for at least a few rounds. Yet now, he's discarded you like a pawn, fully aware that you've lost your value. Yang Yuan paled. I don't know what you're talking about, he rasped. No matter, Tsway Boo-qoo replied. You can take your time explaining after we defeat Lord Xiao. The Zhuoye Bureau has plenty of methods to ensure you speak the truth. I'll hand these paintings and that woman over for the Empress to handle. Tsway Boo-qoo! Yang Yuan cried, furious. Didn't you just promise me? You lying scoundrel! What did I promise? Tsway Boo-qoo asked innocently. I can't remember. You son of a bitch! The gold bricks weren't firmly embedded in the wall. Tsway Boo-qoo easily pried one loose and brought it crashing down on Yang Yuan's head and shoulders. Help! Murder! Yang Yuan screamed in agony, but his bound legs prevented him from moving more than a few steps. He stumbled and fell to the ground, his pained curses transforming into desperate howls. Stop! Stop! I'll tell you everything! His hair was disheveled, his face streaked with tears and snot. Gone was his neatly groomed appearance and dignified bearing. Should you be happy I hit you with one of your beloved gold bricks? Tsway Boo-qoo sighed regretfully. Unfortunately, I'm feeling a bit weak, or you could have been even happier. Thank heavens an invalid like you lacks strength, Yang Yuan thought, or you'd have beaten me to death. Tsway Boo-qoo seized his collar and yanked him forward. Considering the lives you've taken by stealing grain, if I were to kill you here, it wouldn't be too harsh a punishment, Tsway Boo-qoo said. He regarded Yang Yuan as if regarding a corpse. A chill washed over the governor, and his body stiffened. However, Tsway Boo-qoo continued, I am an official of Great Sway. I must abide by the law and cannot enact punishment on you myself. He patted Yang Yuan's cheek. Commandery Governor Yang, do you suffer from seizures? Why did you suddenly slam yourself into the wall and hurt yourself like that? Yang Yuan was silent. Come, Tsway Boo-qoo said mildly. I'll have a doctor treat you when we return. He extended a hand to help Yang Yuan up, but the man recoiled in terror as if encountering a demon. Tsway Boo-qoo ignored him and returned above ground to the study. As he ordered the Zhuoye guards to bring Yang Yuan up, the guards of the commandery governor's residence timidly brought him a letter. Upon it was no address, no signature, only a single verse. Though our separation is brief, the longing grows apace. In Zhao's tea house, an old friend awaits. When Pei Jingjie and Qiao Xian approached, they found him still silently holding the letter. Cui Xianxiang, who is that letter from? Tsway Boo-qoo came back to himself. He said coolly, Xiao Lü. Qiao Shan's expression flickered, but Pei Jingja gasped. The pavilion leader of the 13 floors of Yuanhai? The demon tyrant? Tsway Boo-qoo had to smile at that moniker. Xiao Lü's appearance, approach, and manner of speaking were all incongruous with the image of a demon tyrant. If anyone embodied a demon tyrant, perhaps it was Feng Xiao. Only once had Tsway Boo-qoo and Xiao Lü met. The few times they'd come up against each other, they'd cross blades from afar. Both sides had earned their share of victories and losses. The 13 floors of Yuanhai had successively lost Yushu, Go Yun, Duan Qihu, Feng Xiaolian, and several other capable agents. But Go Yun had been from Goguryeo, so Xiao Lü had used Feng Xiao to eliminate him and gain control over the Buyeo sect. Duan Qihu had turned against the 13 floors, unwilling to join them in rebellion, so Xiao Lü had taken the chance to dispose of him as well. On the other hand, Tsway Boo-qoo's side had barely obtained the Jade of Heaven Lake, only to allow it to fall back into enemy hands. Even now, Tsway Boo-qoo had yet to capture Xiao Lü. They were evenly matched. Every time Tsway Boo-qoo faced off against Xiao Lü, even he couldn't predict the winner until the very last moment. I'll go, Lord Chief. Qiao Shan dropped to one knee, bowing her head to await his command. You wish to go? Tsway Boo-qoo looked at the bun atop her head, his expression inscrutable. Yes. Xiao Lü's martial arts are on par with Feng Xiao's. He's likely to appear in person this time, and you stand no chance against him. Even so, do you still wish to go? I do. Pei Jingja looked at the two of them in confusion, but didn't interrupt. Then you may, said Tsway Boo-qoo. Qiao Shan tightened her grip on her scabbard and rose to her feet. Come back alive. Qiao Shan's heart trembled. This subordinate will do her best. Pei Jingja hurriedly intervened. Xiao Lü is incredibly strong. How do you expect to beat him alone? Qiao Shan ignored him and smoothly leapt onto her horse. With a clear cry, she and her steed galloped away and disappeared into the vast night. Are you sending her to her death? Pei Jingja shouted at Tsway Boo-qoo, unable to contain himself. He mounted his horse and chased after her. Tsway Boo-qoo watched them leave and said to Guan Shanhai, We're going to Feng Yuan Tavern. Guan Shanhai was puzzled. Isn't Deputy Chief Fung already there? Tsway Boo-qoo sighed. That's why we have to go. This letter proves there's no one at Zhao's tea house. Xiao Lü would do everything in his power to kill Feng Xiao at Feng Yuan Tavern. Understanding dawned on Guan Shanhai. You deliberately sent Qiao Shan to Zhao's tea house to save her life. Since she's made her choice, I'll protect her. Tsway Boo-qoo mounted his own horse and spurred it to a gallop. Let's go be the heroes who rescue the beauty. Guan Shanhai was seriously injured and had yet to heal. At these words, he sputtered and almost choked to death right then and there. One of us is sick, and the other is wounded. How are we supposed to rescue anyone? We'll just be a snack for our enemies. But Tsway Boo-qoo was already riding away. Guan Shanhai had no choice but to steel himself to risk his life at his lord's side as he urged his horse in pursuit. In Guangqian County, there was a street with a lovely name, the Long Alley of Peach Blossoms. At the end of the street lay Feng Yuan Tavern. Come midnight, 3 figures stood before the tavern door, identical in all ways, from their silhouettes to their facial features. The heavy scent of blood wafted off of them. Had they not been cloaked in black robes, the crimson stains would have been visible on their garments. Whether it was their blood or the blood of their foes was impossible to discern. One Feng Xiao held a blood-stained fan. He said in disdain, Can you please put this thing down now? Another Feng Xiao kindly reminded him, Even if you throw away the fan, your clothes are stained with blood. The first Feng Xiao stamped his foot. You're awful. Are you suggesting I take off my clothes? The second Feng Xiao said indignantly, When did I say that? The third Feng Xiao couldn't contain himself any longer. Can you stop making those expressions with my face? The first Feng Xiao smiled sweetly. Deputy Chief, I want to return to my own face as well. But look, these stupid dogs are blocking the way and refuse to leave. Can't you drive them off? Heaven knows I need to bathe and change my clothes. The smell of blood is making me nauseous. Qin Miaoyu, Feng Xiao warned. Try acting cute with my face again, and you won't like the consequences. The first Feng Xiao finally fell silent. The second Feng Xiao opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the third. Ming Yue, shut up. Just ahead, in the middle of the street, the young leader of the Jinhuan Guild, Leng, stood with 6 of his own martial experts, waiting in formation. This was the second challenge. Feng Xiao, Ming Yue, and Qin Miaoyu had spent 2 full hours eliminating 11 experts in the tavern. The only one who'd managed to slip their net was Yuan Sansa, and he'd fled with grave injuries. But for this, they'd paid a significant price. Qin Miaoyu's right arm hung at an unnatural angle, blood dripping steadily from the wound. Her attempts at humor were merely to distract herself from the pain. Ming Yue, beside her, had suffered a wound in his abdomen. Though he'd sealed his acupoints to staunch the bleeding, the damage to his cultivation was severe. He required urgent treatment. As for Feng Xiao, it was impossible to tell if he had sustained any injuries at all. He looked the same as ever. Donglu, adopted son of Ningshi, since your father doesn't dare face us himself, he sent you to meet your end. If I were in your shoes, I'd leave while you still can. Qin Miaoyu sighed. By joining the 13 floors of Yuanhai, Ningshi has made a tremendous gamble with the lives and fortunes of the entire Jinhuan Guild, Ming Yue added. You're the adopted son, but you also serve as the young leader of the Jinhuan Guild. Whether for the sake of righteousness or your own personal interests, you should know what choice to make. Both Qin Miaoyu and Ming Yue had impersonated Feng Xiao, but though their act had been impressive, Qin Miaoyu was a mediocre martial artist, and Ming Yue was unaccustomed to playing the zither. Feng Xiao had done most of the work. Their enemies wouldn't fall for the ruse a second time. Leng truly embodied his surname, cold. His face was as calm as still water as he drew his blade from its scabbard, his gaze fixed on Feng Xiao. It's true that you've defeated 12 experts in a row, but even I can see you sustained injuries. Should you manage to survive this round, there are more enemies waiting for you. Why not surrender? That way I can hand you over to my superiors. Deputy Chief, Qin Miaoyu pouted. I'm no good with the zither strings. Earlier, I barely managed to avoid slicing off my arm. This time, let me use a weapon I'm actually skilled with. Feng Xiao sneered. Play cute with me while wearing my face one more time, and I'll sew your mouth shut. The instant he said the word shut, he lunged toward Donglu. Donglu's eyes went wide. He'd known of Feng Xiao's exceptional strength. Even experts like Yushu and Fan Yuan had struggled against him. Leng and the 6 experts of the Jinhuan Guild could only fare worse. Despite their impressive titles, they were unlikely to last more than a few moves against a martial artist of Feng Xiao's caliber. However, that was under normal circumstances. Feng Xiao had just emerged from a ferocious battle in the tavern. No matter how skilled he was, he had to be exhausted. If Donglu could seriously injure him, the knight's endeavor would not be in vain. Even so, he was caught off guard by the sheer speed of Feng Xiao's Tinggong. Feng Xiao sailed toward Leng like a ghost, silent as the flowing clouds. The moment Feng Xiao appeared in front of him, Leng unsheathed his blade, but before he could strike, a powerful force seized his hand and forced his saber back into its scabbard. Excruciating pain rippled through his chest as the meridians of his heart were severed. Leng fell down dead, face frozen in an expression of disbelief. The 6 experts erupted in shouts, all moving in to avenge their young guild leader. Feng Xiao shot into the air. In a single step, he was behind them, turning to raise his hand as zither strings shot out and targeted 3 of his attackers. Of the 5 strings he'd brought, 2 had been lost in the tavern. He was left with only 3. At least 6 lives had been claimed by those 3 strings, and they stank of blood. Normally, Feng Xiao would have thrown them away in disgust, but tonight he had to hold his nose and reuse them. 6 experts, 3 strings. He could only strike half of his attackers. Ming Yue and Qin Miaoyu also sprang into action. Ming Yue wielded a longsword, while Qin Miaoyu flourished her sleeves, the pair's murderous intent converging into the chilling light that surged toward their foes. Thunder rumbled ominously overhead, and the clouds crackled with lightning, an omen of storms to come. The sound echoed like the beat of a war drum urging on the night's bloody slaughter. On the long alley of peach blossoms, what fell upon the dark stones wasn't flower petals, but splatters of blood that bloomed across the stones. From now on, perhaps the name would carry a different connotation. The battle sprawled over the street. Blades flashed and glinted, while bloodlust boiled the air. Both sides of the street lay in eerie silence, as if the surrounding houses were uninhabited. 6 people fell to the ground alongside their young guild leader, one after another, their eyes wide open in death. Qin Miaoyu staggered 2 steps before her legs buckled. She collapsed, retching blood. At the sight of her, Feng Xiao abruptly said, "Tsway Boo-qoo looks much better when he vomits blood." But, okay. At the sight of her, I almost reread that. Okay. Qin Miaoyu was speechless. She longed to grab one of the Jinhuan Guild's sabers and hurl it at Feng Xiao, but she didn't dare. Since she'd switched allegiances from the Buyeo sect to the Zhejian Bureau, she'd relied on Feng Xiao for her survival. Besides, despite having killed so many, Feng Xiao's face wasn't even flushed, as if he hadn't exerted himself at all. The man was terrifying. Ming Yue, though not spitting blood, was struggling to stand. His face had taken on an alarming blue cast. He stumbled over to a wall and slid down to regulate his breathing, aware that greater challenges lay ahead. "Who else is there?" Qin Miaoyu cried out. "What are you waiting for? Get the hell out here." "You're injured. Save your strength," Ming Yue cautioned. Feng Xiao gave him a light kick. "Can you stop making such an honest expression with my face?" But they didn't have to wait long. The enemy had answered Qin Miaoyu's call and gotten the hell out there. This time, it was only one person. He came from the far end of the street, sauntering toward them as if he'd come to the long alley of peach blossoms to admire the flowers rather than take their lives. He held an umbrella overhead. At first, Qin Miaoyu thought he was a passerby who had mistakenly wandered over. She urged him gently. "This place is dangerous. You should go." Feng Xiao frowned. "He only looks respectable. Do you really think an ordinary person would take a stroll here in the dead of night? Keep this up, and you can forget about staying at the Zhejian Bureau. I don't suffer fools." "We're all exhausted," said Qin Miaoyu indignantly. "You want to keep fighting and killing? If we can say a few kind words and convince him to leave, won't that save us a lot of trouble?" Feng Xiao shattered her fantasy without mercy. "Enough. That's the pavilion leader of the 13 floors of Yunhai." "What?" Qin Miaoyu stared in shock, looking back at the newcomer. It was hard to believe this gentle, elegant, and refined young man was, in fact, their most formidable enemy. Xiao Lü chuckled softly and stopped a short distance away. "Deputy Chief Fung, how are you?" "If you want to fight me, let's fight," Feng Xiao said, impatient. "Don't waste my time." Xiao Lü looked at him with sympathy. "You've just been injured. If we fight now, I fear you won't stand a chance. Better to rest a bit first. I prefer a fair fight." "If you want a fair fight, why did you send so many people earlier?" Feng Xiao wanted to shout, but on consideration, he decided to save his strength for the inevitable confrontation. He knew Xiao Lü was right. Many martial artists could detect and influence each other's qi. He could feel Xiao Lü's presence, which meant Xiao Lü could sense his condition too. Qin Miaoyu was as good as empty air. There was no point relying on her. Ming Yue was strong, but he wouldn't stand a chance against Xiao Lü, especially in his current state. As for Feng Xiao, Although he'd have been happy to fight Xiao Lü under normal circumstances, the battle in the tavern had drained much of his strength. Leng Du's group had proved easier to handle than Yuan Sansa's, but Feng Xiao's accumulated injuries had also been aggravated in the fight and were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Xiao Lü had planned it all out, but retreat was not an option. The moment Feng Xiao withdrew, Tsway Boo-qoo would be in danger. "Aw, you're thinking about him?" "The last time we met, it must have been difficult for you to feign incompetence and lose to me. Someone as proud as you must find it unbearable. I expect you'll do all you can to beat me today. But experts are everywhere in this world. It's a pity. Even if you manage to beat me, you still won't be the best," Feng Xiao said. Xiao Lü smiled faintly. "Why would I want to be the best? I am merely a rebel, not a member of the Jianghu. Are you worried I'll harm Tsway Boo-qoo? Don't worry, Deputy Chief Fung. I won't kill him. The only one I want dead is you." As the last words rang out, the sound of galloping hooves echoed in the distance. The two men fell silent, listening intently. Through the night fog, they spotted a tall and slender figure charging toward them on horseback, cloak billowing behind him in the wind. Xiao Lü started as he recognized the rider. He turned to Feng Xiao, who appeared equally surprised. The newcomer pulled back the reins, and the horse reared up with a long whinny. "Chief Tsway," Feng Xiao scoffed, his expression icy. "You have a nose as keen as a dog's. You show up wherever there's trouble. Xiao Lü is my prey. Today, it's the Zhejiang Bureau who will capture him. If you dare interfere, I'll kill you first." Feng Yuantian. Tsway Boo-qoo's expression was obscured by the fog. Only his familiar voice remained unchanged. "The question you asked me yesterday. I can answer it now. My answer is, I would." Oh. Whew. Feng Xiao's breath caught. I know, right? Oh, God. What had he asked him yesterday? "Would you entrust your back to me?" Chapter 148. The night mist clung to the man's silhouette, but Feng Xiao could visualize it without needing to look. A slender figure clad in wide-sleeved robes that whispered in the autumn breeze. If the wind picked up or a particularly frosty gust hit, it might easily fell this invalid and leave him bedridden for weeks. Perhaps it would put him in his grave, and the world would be rid of one more scourge. The man's lips were very thin. Right now, they'd be pressed tight against the cold. The mouth they belonged to mirrored the nature of its owner. Harsh and merciless, faster and sharper than any sword, capable of making someone choke to death on their own rage. The hands gripping the reins would be pale, not from exertion, but from the biting chill. This cool autumn weather was merely an inconvenience for others, but for Tsway Boo-qoo it was a significant obstacle. The matter of young Yuan must have been resolved by now. While others might have viewed the encounter as a deadly trial, Tsway Boo-qoo was accustomed to even greater twists and turns. He meticulously calculated the motives of those around him, and his presence here now was a clear indication that young Yuan had posed no challenge at all. Tsway Boo-qoo should have been sitting in the governor's residence, holding a hand stove to warm himself as he gave orders and awaited reports of success. Not galloping here in the middle of the night to attend a far more dangerous appointment. The corners of Feng Xiao's mouth curled slightly, but his words cut like blades of frost. "You'd what? Fall for my charms? Tsway Boo-qoo, you think too highly of yourself. You consider yourself clever, but in my eyes you're no more than a withered branch on the verge of death. If not for the name of the Zhejiang Bureau, I'd never have bothered with you. Take a good look in the mirror. Is there anything about you worth my attention?" There was no sound in the dark night. Feng Xiao's disdain echoed over the empty street. "I'm afraid I'll lose my appetite if I keep looking at your face. Get the hell out of here before I get rid of you myself. Do you hear me? Go!" Tsway Boo-qoo remained still, not dismounting, not even responding. Perhaps Feng Xiao's words had pricked him, for he lingered there in silence. Confused, Ming Yue looked at Feng Xiao. He opened his mouth to speak, but could think of nothing to say. Qin Miaoyu sighed quietly. Who said women were the capricious ones? When men lied about their desires, they were the equal of any woman. Tsway, you heard the deputy chief. Xiao Lü's tone was gentle, without a hint of anger. I believe I left a letter asking to meet you at Zhao's tea house. It's precisely because you invited me to Zhao's tea house that I knew you would come looking for Feng Xiao here, Tsway Boo-qoo said calmly. No one could tell whether Feng Xiao's words had affected him. Xiao Lü sighed. I didn't want to kill you, which is why I tried to mislead you. If you knew that, why walk willingly into danger? Yang Yuan may be captured, but he won't tell us where the grain is hidden. Thus, I have no choice but to ask you, Pavilion Leader Xiao. It's gone, Xiao Lü said bluntly. All of it? Xiao Lü smiled. I gave you Yang Yuan and took the grain. Isn't that fair? The man responsible is in custody, and you have an explanation for the emperor. I'll consider the grain my reward. Tsway Boo-qoo nodded. It is indeed fair. Tsway, Xiao Lü said good-naturedly. Though Fan Yun betrayed me, I've always admired you. We're two of a kind, so I know you're too proud to join my side without thinking it through. I'll deal with Feng Xiao first. With the Zhejiang Bureau out of the way, you'll have one less opponent. You'll have the best of both worlds. Isn't that wonderful? Of everyone present, only Feng Xiao posed a genuine challenge to Xiao Lü. He could have dispatched Tsway Boo-qoo in an instant, yet he took time to patiently explain his intentions. Feng Xiao sneered in deep displeasure. Tsway Boo-qoo looked toward Xiao Lü's right hand, obscured by his wide sleeve. He wasn't concealing it intentionally. Both his sleeves were of equal length, but his withered right arm was shorter than his left, leaving his right hand tucked out of view. If not for this disability and the scorn it provoked, Xiao Lü would likely occupy a high position in the Chun imperial court. Even with this disadvantage, he had been willing to set aside his pride, to flatter and submit to his superiors. In time, his capabilities would have secured him a role as a general or a minister. But Xiao Lü was too proud. He was indeed very much like Tsway Boo-qoo, who had preferred to venture into the wilderness and perish rather than remain in the Tsway residence and accept the food they disdainfully offered. In tumultuous times, anyone could become a voice of rebellion and question whether kings were born or made. Anyone could become a leader capable of heralding change. Xiao Lü's pride forbade him from bowing his head. It compelled him to choose the hardest path. The most chaotic periods of the Central Plains' history had passed. Although the world remained divided between the northern and southern dynasties, it was a far cry from the era of the 16 kingdoms 2 centuries prior. Xiao Lü had been born at an inopportune time. The heavens had endowed him with the potential to be a man of great change, yet the emerging Sui dynasty loomed before him, and his intellectual equal Tsway Boo-qoo stood in his way. Xiao Lü waited patiently for Tsway Boo-qoo's response, fully aware he might simply be stalling for time. After the incident at Qixia Villa, Yang Yuan had feared Tsway Boo-qoo and his companions might uncover the grain and had agreed to meet Xiao Lü's demands. While Tsway Boo-qoo and his allies were dealing with the commandery governor, Xiao Lü had been directing his men to transport the grain out of the county in batches. Feng Xiao's demise was merely a trophy to collect along the way. In this round of their game, Xiao Lü knew he had already claimed victory and regained his lost ground. There's something I neglected to mention, Tsway Boo-qoo said suddenly. Did you never wonder why I brought only a few people to Guangtian County? I didn't even post any Zuoya guards nearby, leaving us at a marked disadvantage against Yang Yuan. It's because before setting out, I deployed them elsewhere to complete a more crucial task. Fan Yuan knew quite a bit about the 13 floors of Yuanhai. With his help, and with a common enemy in you, Pavilion Leader Xiao, we successfully dismantled a villa called Ling Bo. I believe the name must ring a bell for you. Tsway Boo-qoo continued placidly. I heard Lingbo Villa housed most of the forces you've been relying on for years while operating in the Southern Dynasty. While the leaders of the 33 rooms may not compare to those of the 13 floors, they are undoubtedly elite members of your organization, including several skilled in astronomy, geography, divination, mathematics, and other various disciplines. I've just received word that 80 to 90% of those individuals had been eliminated, while the remaining were injured and fled amid the chaos. I fear they won't be much help moving forward. Pavilion leader Xiao must have invested considerable effort in recruiting those individuals. How unfortunate that while you were attending to us here, your own backyard was ablaze. Tell me, do you think the grains you got here was worth the annihilation of one of your layers? Xiao Lü's eyes narrowed, and the smile gradually faded from his lips. The corners of his mouth flattened to reveal a hint of coldness. Tsway Boo-qoo, you always bring me such joyous surprises. If I discovered you sooner and brought you into the 13 floors of Yuanhai then, the Tsway dynasty would be the one in ruins now. After Fan Yun betrayed me, I shifted all my resources in the Southern dynasty elsewhere. I never imagined he would still find them. Pavilion leader Xiao, don't forget that Fan Yun has ties to the Emperor of Chun, Cui Buqu replied. While he may oppose the growth of the Tsway dynasty, he certainly won't let the 13 floors of Yuanhai become a threat to the south. As they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. What's wrong with cooperating with him just this once? If your intention was to provoke me, you've succeeded. Xiao Lü stepped toward him, as leisurely as before. But in the blink of an eye, he was in front of Tsway Boo-qoo. He snatched him off the horse, gripping his shoulder so tightly he couldn't move an inch. By the time Guan Shanhai reacted, it was too late. With a wave of his sleeve, Xiao Lü sent the guard crashing to the ground several yards away. The dull thud of his body hitting the stone made everyone wince. I am your greatest foe, not Feng Xiao, Tsway Boo-qoo said. I'm the Empress's trusted aide, and my Zuoya Bureau handles the most sensitive cases. Don't you want to capture me, torture me, and extract intel about the Northern Dynasty? Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder blade was being crushed under Xiao Lü's hand, and the agony made it nearly impossible for him to speak. Yet conversely, the pain sharpened his mind. He knew Xiao Lü wouldn't kill him. Otherwise, it would be Tsway Boo-qoo's throat under his fingers rather than his shoulder. Whether Feng Xiao dies today or tomorrow makes no difference. Isn't a living Tsway Boo-qoo much more valuable than a dead Feng Xiao? You refuse to join the 13 floors of Yuanhai, said Xiao Lü softly. Why would I want a Tsway Boo-qoo who'd rather die than submit? Tsway Boo-qoo closed his eyes, attempting to steady his breathing amid the pain. I'll join. I asked Pavilion leader Xiao to accept me. Xiao Lü chuckled. And then what? You'll become the next Fan Yun and betray me? Within 3 years, I'll topple the Southern Dynasty for you. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed a few times. He was as pale as a ghost. On the condition that you do not harm anyone here tonight. Xiao Lü sighed quietly. Is it worth it? For a single Feng Xiao? Tsway Boo-qoo's lips parted. Though he made no sound, Xiao Lü saw him mouth the words, worth it. Feng Xiao moved. He shouldn't have. After the injuries he'd sustained, he'd need to regulate his breathing for half a day at least before he had the strength to fight again. Yet he attacked with lightning speed, as swift and fluid as a wisp of smoke or cloud as he swept toward Xiao Lü. Regardless of how confident Xiao Lü was of his victory, when faced with a martial artist of Feng Xiao's caliber, even he couldn't fight while holding Tsway Boo-qoo. He released him and met Feng Xiao's attack. Within seconds, they were embroiled in a fierce battle. Tsway Boo-qoo crumbled. His shoulder blade was shattered, leaving one side of his body immobilized. It was all he could do to simply lie there. Qin Miaoyu rushed over and helped him up. She gingerly examined his wound, gasping when she felt warm blood on her hand. I have medicine for internal and external injuries in my lapels, Tsway Boo-qoo said. The Zuoya Bureau chief's chronic illnesses had practically turned him into a doctor himself. Since he was often injured, he always carried medicine with him. Give them to Ming Yue and Guan Shanhai too. Qin Miaoyu wasted no time. She quickly retrieved the medicine bottle and shook out a large pill. Should this humble lady go to the tavern and find some water for you? No need. Upon witnessing someone with Feng Xiao's face call themselves a humble lady, Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder ached even more fiercely. He quickly sent her off to administer medicine to the others. Before them, the battle between Feng Xiao and Xiao Lü had just begun. In the eyes of onlookers, the two figures resembled flickering shadows. At times they clashed midair. At others, they appeared to materialize atop the tavern's roof. Speed against speed, force against force. The roof tiles shattered and split under their feet, and the roof collapsed with a resounding crash. Walls creaked, dust flew, and the battered tavern was reduced to rubble. Both were oblivious to the fact that their battlefield had shifted from the tavern roof back to the street. The tiles splintered and flew, held aloft by the force of their qi as if they were mere toys designed to test their strength. The debris formed a barrier that isolated Tsway Boo-qoo and the others from the conflict. Feng Xiao and Xiao Lü's movements suddenly slowed. Like sprays of ink ebbing away over white paper, the whirling tiles gradually fell aside, leaving the adversaries standing like a pair of jutting rocks teetering precariously at the edge of a cliff. Facing each other at a distance of an arm's length, the two men seemed as fragile as stacked eggs. One misstep would send them plummeting into the abyss below. Feng Xiao's martial arts had reached an extraordinary peak. After utilizing the two sarira, his skills had ascended to even greater heights, easily placing him among the ranks of grandmasters. But Xiao Lü was not one to be outdone, and not only was he strong, as he himself had implied, he had strength to spare. Ming Yue and Guan Shanhai were both competent martial artists, but even they couldn't gauge Xiao Lü's true strength. How absurd that rather than pursue greater achievements in martial arts, such a talented person had instead fixated on his desire to usurp the throne. And yet, how many of the Jianghu's countless experts had met their own downfall in their quest for martial supremacy? Perhaps no one could say Xiao Lü had made the wrong choice. Everyone had their own ambitions. Qin Miaoyu watched him intently as he fought. Xiao Lü used the Jade of Heaven Lake, she cried in dismay. Ming Yue's face fell. To demonstrate his sincerity in joining the 13 floors of Yuanhai, Feng Xiao had taken the Jade of Heaven Lake from the palace and presented it to Fan Yuan. During the later chaos, while Fan Yuan was preoccupied battling others, the jade had disappeared. Until now, its whereabouts had been a mystery. Apparently, Xiao Lü had put it to good use. In Liugong City, Qin Miaoyu had briefly possessed the Jade of Heaven Lake and secretly used it to enhance her training, gaining some insight into its wonders. If she hadn't, she would never have been a strong enough martial artist to deceive the enemy into thinking she was Feng Xiao, even for a moment. Despite her limited knowledge, the Jade of Heaven Lake had significantly enhanced Qin Miaoyu's internal strength. Such a tool would be even more effective in Xiao Lü's hands. Perhaps he'd already absorbed the entire stone. No wonder he exuded such confidence. With his vast internal strength, he might have no equal in the Jianghu. Although Feng Xiao possessed the enhancement of the Sarira, could he truly compare? Qin Miaoyu dared not say any more for fear of distracting Feng Xiao. When confronting such a formidable opponent, even the slightest misstep could determine the outcome of the battle. Her thoughts raced. Feng Xiao and Xiao Lü swept toward each other. The shattered tiles surrounding them seemed to respond even faster than the two combatants, as if held in a massive, invisible hand that tightened its grip. The fragments exploded with an earth-shaking boom, scattering shards in all directions. Chapter 149. Propelled by qi, the debris exploded outward. The onlookers had no time to dodge. Fragments of tiles sliced toward them, opening bloody scratches on their heads and faces. The two fighters remained unscathed in the eye of the storm, shielded by their qi. Yet they faced no less pressure than the onlookers. Feng Xiao couldn't guess Xiao Lü's thoughts at the moment, but he himself had only one. When swimming against the current, one must keep pushing forward or be swept away. In their previous fight, Xiao Lü had concealed his identity and feigned incompetence. Feng Xiao had been unable to assess his true abilities. This time, though mentally prepared, he was still secretly shocked by the strength of his opponent. Xiao Lü, having fully absorbed the Jade of Heaven Lake, now possessed unfathomable internal power. Supported by this vast reservoir of energy, his martial arts had reached unprecedented heights. Feng Xiao might really find victory difficult to achieve, but even if his odds were slim, he couldn't afford to lose. Feng Yuan Tavern lay in ruins around them. The two men traded strikes amid the debris, their palms colliding thrice. Xiao Lü sustained a blow to the shoulder, while Feng Xiao took a strike to the ribs. They both fell back 3 steps, but a keen observer could spot the subtle difference between them. Xiao Lü's steps were smaller than Feng Xiao's, but Xiao Lü didn't press his attack. He pulled back, waiting for Feng Xiao to reveal a weakness. Feng Xiao waited as well, secretly regulating his breathing. Qi rose from the dantian in one's lower abdomen, then split at the Bai Hui point at the top of the head, flowing down into the rest of the body in 2 streams. As he breathed, his injured meridians were soothed, showing gradual signs of recovery. But it wasn't enough. Xiao Lü wouldn't give him time to heal. He was only biding his time until he saw the perfect moment to strike. Qi swirled around them, current and countercurrent, gently testing one another. The instant one of them withdrew, the peaceful facade would drop, and the qi would swirl up, savage and howling. Dark clouds swarmed overhead, and heavy raindrops began to fall. The combatants seemed not to notice as they let the rain soak their clothes. Feng Xiao closed his eyes, plunging himself into an endless darkness where light and shadow faded. His qi waned like rain clouds chased by the wind, struggling to gather despite the futility of their efforts. Xiao Lü shot forward. Brandishing a bare longsword, he moved with the same swiftness as his sword glare. It painted a dazzling streak before the rainy night as he hurtled toward Feng Xiao like a shooting star. Resigned, Feng Xiao watched him come. The sword glare bore down on him, yet he merely pressed a hand to his injured abdomen in apparent disregard for the danger. Qin Miaoyu gasped. Her sweaty palms were so cold she forgot she was still sitting in a puddle of muddy rainwater. Feng Xiao was their only hope right now. If he fell, Tsway Boo-qoo might survive, but Xiao Lü would show no mercy to the rest. What was more, Qin Miaoyu originally hailed from the Buyeo sect, which was loyal to the 13 floors of Yunhai. She was a traitor to Xiao Lü. Initially, she'd joined the Zhejiang Bureau merely to save herself, but over time she'd grown accustomed to her new life. The Buyeo sect's members were spies and assassins. They couldn't operate in the open. While the Zhejiang Bureau, too, completed clandestine missions from time to time, the atmosphere was nothing like the harsh indifference of the Buyeo sect. At least she had a kind-hearted boss like Ming Yue and a dim-witted but easy-to-bully colleague like Pei Jingjie. But her survival tonight didn't depend on her. Qin Miaoyu could only hope that Feng Xiao, who prided himself on being best in the world, would demonstrate his true prowess tonight. At the very least, he sought to show some compassion for his pitiful subordinates, who earned meager salaries and were always running to and fro. She couldn't resist sneaking a look at the man beside her. Tsway Boo-qoo was also watching the fight. Qin Miaoyu had sealed his acupoints to stop the bleeding, but this didn't alleviate the pain. His shoulder blade remained shattered. Qin Miaoyu understood that kind of pain. She'd once suffered a broken arm in a fight. The agony had been unbearable, only eased through groans and tears. But Tsway Boo-qoo didn't shed a tear or utter a single groan. He remained silent, keenly observing the unfolding battle as if he wasn't injured at all. What strength of will was required to ignore such bone-crushing pain? Qin Miaoyu couldn't imagine it. A loud bang echoed over the street as qi collided. She whirled to see that Xiao Lü's sword glare had halted just 2 fingers' width from Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao's palm flipped smoothly from his abdomen into an open palm strike aimed at Xiao Lü's face. At the same moment, His other hand unleashed a string. The string and sword qi collided with a thunderous roar, and the two sprang apart. They touched down on opposite eaves, landing lightly as drifting feathers, their footing as steady as a mountain. After a beat, a stream of bright crimson trickled from the corner of Feng Xiao's mouth. Xiao Lü remained serene, sword in one hand and his other arm tucked behind his back. Qin Miaoyu was shocked. Oh no! Her boss was clearly the one at a disadvantage. Yet strangely, Xiao Lü didn't attempt a finishing blow. Sword glare and zither string clashed again, but this time it felt as though the two had reached some unspoken understanding. Neither struck with their full power, cautiously testing one another as they advanced and retreated, light and shadow weaving together in the rain. While this jousting of qi was thrilling in itself, it lacked the spectacle of a life-and-death struggle. Could it be that Xiao Lü had been enchanted by her boss's handsome face and couldn't bear to end the life of this incredible beauty? But that was impossible. From what she'd seen, Xiao Lü might have some sympathy for Tsway Boo-qoo, but he would show no mercy to Feng Xiao. And given Feng Xiao's pride, it was impossible for him to truly compromise and act the submissive wife as he was doing now. There had to be something she'd missed. Qin Miaoyu was baffled, but Feng Xiao knew exactly what had happened. He'd played a little trick, taking advantage of the rain and night fog as cover to intertwine 3 zither strings into one. With a swift flick, the string had split again and struck Xiao Lü in the lower abdomen. Now that his opponent was also injured, things were a little fairer. Feng Xiao smirked. Xiao Lü flipped his wrist, unleashing a sword glare that undulated like the tide crashing in waves upon the shore. It came toward Feng Xiao like a mountain on the brink of collapse, boulders and pine trees tumbling from its peak. Like Mount Tai crumbling, or the yellow river breaching its banks, heaven and earth shook as the rocks collapsed and the water surged up. This attack was nature manifest, great enough to astonish even the gods. Feng Xiao felt as though he was walking alone at the foot of a towering mountain caving in on itself, struggling against a relentless flood. Pressure closed in around him, stifling his movements and forcing him backward. He felt an overwhelming urge to kneel and plead for mercy, to beg the unforgiving heavens to spare his life. As he gazed around his mind's eye, all he could see was desolation. Everything but the mountain had been reduced to ashes. Those who prided themselves on being blessed by heaven were but a drop in the ocean, insignificant amid such profound change. The heavens and earth, the wind and rain, all howled at him to kneel and submit, just as those already consumed by the torrent had, lowering their heads to the ground before dissolving into ashes as their souls scattered away. But how could Feng Xiao submit? His lip curled in a sneer. As far back as Feng Xiao could remember, he had never knelt before heaven and earth, let alone cried or begged for mercy. People pleaded with him. He had never pleaded with others. He came as he pleased, left as he liked. The wealth and nobility of the human world, the ultimate summit of the martial arts, the heavenly will as it was wrought upon the secular realm, he didn't give a damn about any of it. If Feng Xiao failed tonight, that invalid would be taken away without his approval. Since when could anyone else decide where Tsway Boo-qoo would go and whether he would live or die? If my almighty self cannot, neither can Xiao Lü. At that moment, Feng Xiao felt as if he'd broken free of some unseen shackle. He had been confined by the world's rules, but now he realized that both the laws of heaven and the laws of society stemmed from the fragmented chaos of the void. And if they were established from something fragmented, why couldn't he fragment what had already been established? His skills had greatly improved after absorbing the two sarira, but they remained constrained within his current limits. A persistent fog hung thick before him, preventing him from making any progress. But now, in this moment of desperation, he grasped the path to survival. He cleared the mist and uncovered blue sky beyond, igniting his heart with fighting spirit. His mind was crystal clear. There were no enemies. There was no Xiao Lü. There was no towering wave of sword qi in front of him. There was only the mountain. When obstructed by a mountain, blast through the stone. When obstructed by a river, split the waters. Feng Xiao raised his hand. 3 strings shot forward, launching like glittering arrows toward the breach in the raging mountain torrent. As far as Xiao Lü was concerned, his sword glare was near flawless. It had transcended all boundaries, and almost no one in the world could overcome it. The only possible weakness lay in the sword glare's angle when it clashed with the opponent's true qi. Still, in a life-and-death battle between experts, it was impossible to predict every outcome. Minor flaws were insignificant. He didn't want to waste any more time battling Feng Xiao. Though his opponent's skills were formidable, they still fell short of his own. That difference would decide the battle's outcome. The sword glare burst forth like a rainbow, illuminating the dark skies. The 3 strings swept forward, each taking a slightly different trajectory. With absolute precision, one slid into the gap created by the slight deviation of the sword glare as it collided with Feng Xiao's qi. Xiao Lü's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that. In such dire straits, Feng Xiao could still launch a counterattack. He grew even more determined to kill him here tonight. In the blink of an eye, his opponent closed the distance, deflecting the sword glare with the strings as he flew forward. Concentrating all his qi into his palm, Feng Xiao struck, leaving Xiao Lü no way to evade. Qin Miaoyu's wide-open eyes saw 2 shadowy figures, thin as wispy smoke, separate. Quiet coughs and muffled groans echoed through the debris, leaving her unable to discern which man the sound came from. While she hesitated, Ming Yue leapt into action, as if he'd been prepared for this moment all along. He jumped up from the ground, charged toward Xiao Lü, and struck out with his palm. Xiao Lü and Ming Yue's palms slammed into each other. The 3rd chief crumbled to the ground like a broken paper kite, but Xiao Lü too staggered back several steps. He wasn't smiling anymore. Only cold, murderous intent remained. As he glanced over, a chill ran through Qin Miaoyu's heart, and her body went stiff. But Xiao Lü's eyes didn't settle on her. His gaze swept past, alighting on Tsway Boo-qoo for the briefest moment. Xiao Lü's cold voice reached his ears, but the man himself had drifted away. "Looks like I must ask Tsway Xiong for pointers some other time. I won't forget the humiliation of Lingbo Villa's destruction." Qin Miaoyu was momentarily stunned. She asked stupidly, "He left? Just like that?" Ming Yue pushed himself up into all 4s and coughed up several mouthfuls of blood with shredded flesh. He'd clearly sustained severe internal injuries from Xiao Lü's last palm strike. "He was seriously injured," Cui Buqu said softly. "He still had some strength left, but so did Feng Xiao. Xiao Lü couldn't guarantee his victory, so he left." Feng Xiao was incredulous. "I was the one who stymied him just now. Why did he only say farewell to you?" Tsway Boo-qoo's face was drawn, yet his eyes remained bright and keen. A hint of a smile flickered within them, softening that sharp edge and lending a gentleness to the raindrops that fell around him. "Maybe because the only opponent he cares about is me?" Feng Xiao snorted coldly. "If you both admire each other so much, why not just go with him?" He advanced slowly toward Tsway Boo-qoo, still cloaked in bloodlust and murderous intent, like an evil Asura or the lord of the underworld. Qin Miaoyu lifted her gaze and saw Feng Xiao's cold eyes. Just as when Xiao Lü had glanced at her earlier, she felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Her reason screamed for her to run away, yet her body remained frozen. Yet Tsway Boo-qoo had the presence of mind to sigh with regret. He left too quickly. There wasn't time. Feng Xiao strode up and dropped to one knee before him, though only to make it easier to look down on him. "You could have easily stayed in your secure governor's residence and let us mutilate each other. What on earth possessed you to come all the way here?" "Just passing by. I saw you say, 'worth it.' You must be blind." Feng Xiao narrowed his eyes. "You said you would entrust your back to me." Tsway Boo-qoo's face was devoid of expression. What I meant was that I would take over the Zhejiang Bureau after your death. There's no need to thank me. Helping others is the foundation of happiness, and we've known each other for some time. Barely a minute had passed, and he was denying everything. Feng Xiao laughed in anger. Rather than waste time arguing, he took hold of Tsway Boo-qoo's chin and lowered his head, swallowing those unfinished words. Chapter 150. Sorry. The rain was light, but the fine drizzle mingled with the dust on the wind and produced an uncomfortable stickiness. Tsway Boo-qoo's hair and clothes were damp, yet the gusting night wind only blew them halfway dry before he was soaked again. He'd rather have been thoroughly drenched by the torrential downpour. It would be better than the clammy feeling of his damp hair and layers of clothing clinging together, heavy as iron, threatening to crush his spine and neck. The ground was an amalgam of crushed stone and mud that made it uncomfortable to lie down. Though the pain in his shoulder had dulled from excruciating agony to a persistent ache, Tsway Boo-qoo still couldn't use one of his arms and had to rely solely on one elbow to try to lift himself. Every breath was greeted not by the fresh scent of rain mingling with damp earth or the sweet aroma of spilled wine from the tavern, but by the metallic tang of blood. His burdened and broken body was weighed down by injuries yet to heal and freshly acquired wounds. He felt more than just pain coursing through his limbs. His old injuries had been aggravated and were screaming shrilly, as if invisible hands were dismantling him with dull knives. But all his agony paled in comparison to the sensation on his lips. Tsway Boo-qoo opened his eyes slightly and, momentarily, forgot to resist. Why would Feng Xiao do such a thing at a time like this? They were seriously injured, and they weren't alone. Guan Shanhai was still out cold, but 2 pairs of eyes bored into them. Feng Xiao's 2 copies wore vacant expressions completely uncharacteristic of the man they were impersonating, frozen in place like twin pieces of wood. When Tsway Boo-qoo caught sight of them from the corner of his eye, his injured bones ached even more. But Feng Xiao paid them no heed, acting as if no one else was there. He pressed his lips harder against Tsway Boo-qoo's, displeased with his distraction. He wasn't content to stop after a taste. He insisted on banging down the door and sampling everything within the master's house before he could be satisfied. Tsway Boo-qoo's uninjured hand found Feng Xiao's shoulder and shoved. He was clearly not playing coy, but unfortunately, the seriously injured Feng Xiao remained as motionless as a firmly planted boulder. He tightened his grip on Tsway Boo-qoo's chin, drawing a faint moan of discomfort from the man beneath him. Maybe, thought Tsway Boo-qoo, he should pretend to be unconscious. It was his usual tactic, after all. Okay. Oh. Feng Xiao appeared to have seen through his plan. He threatened in a voice so low only Tsway Boo-qoo could hear it. If you pretend to pass out, I swear I'll strip you naked in front of him. Tsway Boo-qoo said nothing. He had no doubt Fungar was capable of doing as he said, but even so, he refused to lose. As he hesitated, Feng Xiao brazenly claimed his mouth, only leisurely drawing back when Tsway Boo-qoo's breathing became disordered and his cheeks flushed. Even then, the effects of Feng Xiao's scorching breath lingered. His usually cold and ashy lips were now vibrant red and swollen from the kiss. The Zuoye chief had been forced to tilt his head to meet Feng Xiao's assault, and the corners of his eyes had reddened, though whether from the rain or their heated breaths it was impossible to say. He was seemingly angry, yet not truly so. Feng Xiao was close enough to see his expression clearly, and his heart swelled with pride knowing that others might not notice such details, but he did. Even the frustration of fighting Xiao Lü to a draw and watching him leave so calmly had faded significantly. Ming Yue's jaw dropped. He didn't even notice the rain falling. He wondered if his injuries were more severe than he'd realized, resulting in Qi deviation-induced hallucination. Hastily, Ming Yue averted his gaze from the 2 entwined figures. Fighting through the pain, he struggled to turn his head to look at Qin Miaoyu, intending to call her over to help him. But Qin Miaoyu was even more stupefied than he was. She stared wide-eyed, unable to tear her gaze away. Suspicious, Ming Yue looked back and found that Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo had already broken apart. Fung coughed a few times, then turned his head and spat out a mouthful of black blood before grabbing Tsway Boo-choo's arm to help him up from the ground. They looked completely normal. So it really had been a hallucination. Ming Yue breathed a sigh of relief. Qin Miaoyu leaned over and whispered, "So the deputy chief and Chief Tsway are in that kind of relationship?" "What kind of relationship?" Ming Yue asked in confusion. When he recalled what he'd just seen, all the hair on his body stood on end. His internal injuries throbbed anew. "They're, cut sleeves." Qin Miaoyu's voice was very low. She was the least severely injured of them all. After the tavern, she hadn't participated in any of the subsequent battles. Now that she'd rested and recovered somewhat, she was the only one with the energy to follow up on these details. Before Ming Yue could answer, Feng Xiao glanced over. His murderous aura still clung to him, and he'd yet to return to his playful, licentious self. Qin Miaoyu immediately fell silent. Not until he turned back around did she exhale and ask Ming Yue in a low voice, "Third Chief, will we still be fighting the Tsway Bureau for credit after this?" Ming Yue's head spun, and his stomach churned as his internal injuries flared. He yearned to vomit up another mouthful of gore. Fung had always been brazen and dismissive of etiquette, but Ming Yue never thought he'd be this audacious. "You could have chosen anyone on earth, yet you had to fall for the chief of the Tsway Bureau." Ming Yue had heard that Tsway Boo-qoo was a prickly character, but this wasn't the source of his headache. It was the Tsway Bureau behind him, and the prospect of what the Empress would think once she found out. Although the Emperor and Empress were themselves deeply in love, no emperor would be pleased to see his subordinates pairing off. It defeated the purpose of all the checks and balances he'd put in place. This matter must remain a strict secret. Ming Yue, diligent and loyal as he was, had already begun contemplating their next step, his injury hurting more with every minute. It was no ordinary internal injury. His last clash with Xiao Lü had exhausted all remnants of Ming Yue's qi, resulting in severe damage to his meridians and organs. Had Xiao Lü not been weakened from his battle with Feng Xiao, Ming Yue would surely have lost his life. "Third Chief." Qin Miaoyu had no idea what Ming Yue was thinking, only that he was staring vacantly ahead as if possessed by an evil spirit. "No, I'm too tired. I need a nap before I deal with this," Ming Yue murmured. He closed his eyes and lay right back down in the muddy puddle, refusing to move. Qin Miaoyu was bewildered. Should she help her superior up or go back alone? She was tired too. If she helped Ming Yue walk the whole way back, but then again, if she returned without him, she would definitely face a reprimand. She looked around and found a dry spot under the eaves to lie down, feeling perfectly at ease as she closed her eyes. She was also injured. She let herself lapse into unconsciousness. Tsway Boo-qoo had gotten to his feet. Feng Xiao was supporting one of his arms, but in truth, he was the one bearing most of Feng Xiao's weight. If he didn't, Feng Xiao probably wouldn't make it back. "Wasn't Deputy Chief Fung awfully majestic a moment ago?" Tsway Boo-qoo sneered, unsympathetic. "Why are you on death's door now?" Feng Xiao sighed. "They say dying under peonies will make you an elegant ghost, but if I really die here, won't I waste all that fine sentiment about me being worth it? If you die, I'll hang bright red lanterns at the Tsway Bureau for 2 weeks," Tsway Boo-qoo replied. "I'll set off firecrackers 3 times a day and throw the most lavish celebration I can afford." Choo-choo. It's charming when a woman speaks insincerely, but when a man does, it's pretentious. You know I would never compare you to the mediocre masses, but is it really so difficult for you to admit even once that you don't want me to die? Since you can run your mouth, you should be fine to walk. Before Tsway Boo-qoo finished speaking, he let Feng Xiao go, completely merciless. Feng Xiao had used all his strength to speak and was caught off guard. He failed to catch himself and fell to the ground, splattering mud all over him. His internal organs burned like they were on fire. The moment his focus turned to his injuries, he couldn't utter so much as a word. Deputy Chief Fung, ever fastidious, a man who would change his clothes for even a tiny speck of dirt, had never been so wretched in his life. As he slowly exhaled, he vaguely heard Tsway Boo-qoo's footsteps fading into the distance. It seemed he was really angry. But this weather was freezing. Why hadn't Feng Xiao put on an extra layer before coming out? Just because he'd felt fine at the time? If he had, his teeth wouldn't be chattering now as the autumn winds and cold rain battered him. Still, when he considered Xiao Lü likely wasn't faring any better, his heart was at peace. Even the disappointment of Tsway Boo-qoo abandoning him wasn't as pronounced. The footsteps sounded again. One step heavy, one step light, as if the person was injured on one side, making their movements unbalanced. Feng Xiao's thoughts stuttered to a halt, and he forced his eyes open. Before he could get a clear look, a cloak stinking of blood fell over him. It was very thick, but half soaked. Feng Xiao frowned as a bamboo cane was stuffed into his right hand. Where in heaven's name had Tsway Boo-qoo found it? Whose cloak is this? His voice was weak, but it didn't hide his distaste. The young leader of the Jinhuan guilds, Tsway Boo-qoo said coolly. You'd better support yourself a little. My shoulder's broken. I don't want a dead man's cloak. Feng Xiao's voice was still scornful, but now it held a hint of playful petulance. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed a few times. As Feng Xiao struggled to sit up, Tsway Boo-qoo grabbed one of his arms and helped him. Pain shot through his own broken bones, but though he stiffened momentarily, he didn't make a sound. Yet Feng Xiao seemed to notice. He drew a breath and steadied himself with the bamboo cane, relieving some of the weight on Tsway Boo-qoo. Even then, his voice dripped disdain. Exchange cloaks with me. I'll wear yours. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. Not a chance. The two of them struggled on, supporting each other as they awkwardly made their way back. Their pace was slow, for they had to spare some of their strength to bicker. Neither was willing to concede. Tsway Boo-qoo, with your sharp tongue and plain looks, if you keep this up, you're sure to die soon. Your lordship needn't feel overly concerned. How about I show some mercy and offer myself up as a living sacrifice? At least then you won't bring calamity upon others. Is Deng Lu's cloak warm? It's passable. Why? Are you thinking about trading with me now that you're cold? Forget it. I heard he has a strange habit. Before every battle, he must sleep with a beautiful woman. Perhaps the cloak you're wearing now was laid under the lady. Who knows what evidence of their passion remains? There seems to be a reek coming from it. Keep talking. I'll vomit blood on you, and we can die together. At last, silence. The rain stopped, and the autumn wind rolled in. Though heavy clouds covered the sky and the moon was absent, a faint, refreshing breeze swirled past. The clear skies that had been gone for so long would finally return. Later, Tsway Boo-qoo sent the Zuoye guard and paid Ginger to fetch the others. A carriage comfortably transported Qin Miaoyu, Ming Yue, and Guan Shanhai back to the relay station. Before Qin Miaoyu could celebrate her wise decision, however, a wave of heavy official duties poured in. She soon wished she could cry and fall into a coma from her wounds like Ming Yue had. Xiao Lü's people had transported all the rice away, and not a single grain remained. Fortunately, the flood had receded, and with the aid of Yang Yuan's testimony, the several large households that had conspired with him were easily captured. Following Yang Yuan's list, Tsway Boo-qoo rounded them all up and pressured them to hand over their stored grain for Peijing to distribute to the citizens. The large households immediately became evasive, unwilling to cough up what they'd swallowed. The Li family even boasted of their relationship with the Li clan of Meng Xi. It was common knowledge that the matriarch of Meng Xi's Li clan was Empress Dugu's older sister. Qin Miaoyu had only joined the Zhejiang Bureau recently and found it difficult to navigate the intricate relationships between Central Plains families. She sought out Tsway Boo-qoo for advice. When Qin Miaoyu arrived, Tsway Boo-qoo had been knocked unconscious by a bowl of hemp powder while the doctor set his bones. His thin lips were pressed tightly together and his brow was furrowed, as if the pain reached him even in his sleep. Qiao Shan stood guard beside him. Qin Miaoyu cast her a quick glance. She'd heard Qiao Shan had knelt at Tsway Boo-qoo's door for most of the night after returning, and that Pei Jingzhe, that fool, had held an umbrella for her the entire time. Only when the sky began to pale with dawn did Tsway Boo-qoo summon her inside. Qin Miaoyu didn't know what they'd discuss, but Qiao Shan's relief afterward was palpable. Her face shone, radiant, as if she'd unshouldered years' worth of burdens. Pei Jingzhe, fool that he was, couldn't take his eyes off her. Qin Miaoyu silently sighed at the incompetence of her Zhejian Bureau colleagues. Noticing her gaze, Qiao Shan looked up, her eyes flashing with coldness and hostility. Qin Miaoyu was taken aback until she remembered she'd been busy all night while Feng Xiao and Ming Yue were both injured and recuperating. She hadn't removed her makeup, so she was still wearing Feng Xiao's face. In that case, she thought wickedly, couldn't she use Deputy Chief Feng's identity to play a trick or two and let him take the blame once he woke? Perhaps she was tired of living. Tsway Boo-qoo opened his eyes in a daze. The pain made him slow to react. He stared at the curtain above his head in silence for a full quarter hour before slowly turning toward Qiao Shan and Qin Miaoyu. "Lord Chief," Qiao Shan said softly, "the doctor visited earlier and left a prescription. The medicine has been prepared. Would you like a bowl?" We know the answer to that. What does she mean? Would you like a bowl? She was talking about taking medicine like drinking soup. Qin Miaoyu considered for a moment. Then she playfully imitated Feng Xiao's voice and tone. "I have candy here." As if by magic, she produced a small jar, opening the lid to release the sweet smell of malt sugar. Tsway Boo-qoo took the jar and looked at her. "Qin Miaoyu, do you have nothing better to do?" Of course he no. Oh gosh. Qin Miaoyu choked. She thought her performance flawless, yet this man had seen right through her. "The Lord Chief is wise." The clever Qin Miaoyu laughed awkwardly, no longer pretending. Before Feng Xiao had gone into seclusion to recover, he'd instructed her to follow Tsway Boo-qoo's commands. Tsway Boo-qoo had shown no mercy ordering her around, driving her like a dog and sending her all over the county. "I've gathered up the refugees as you asked. It's just as your lordship predicted. They refuse to camp outside the city." "They've been imprisoned for many days," said Tsway Boo-qoo coolly. "Of course, they no longer trust the government. To them, leaving the city is no different than waiting for death. Only remaining offers a glimmer of hope." His voice was hoarse and slow, but very steady. Qin Miaoyu patiently waited for him to finish, then nodded. "It's just as you say. I let them take temporary shelter in the county office. It's vacant after Huang Lue's death, and I set some constables there to keep watch. For now, things are under control. The trouble is, there's no grain left. The wealthy households aren't willing to provide any. They claim it's the government's responsibility to aid the refugees, and that it goes against all reason to tell them to give their own food away. The Ding and Li families are most adamant, and they have relatives at court. This subordinate isn't sure what we ought to do. I must trouble your lordship for advice." Chapter 151. When Qiao Shan brought in the medicine, Tsway Boo-qoo regarded the bowl with disgust, his expression more hateful than when he'd looked upon Xiao Lü. He had no good opinion of those landlords. They were the type who wouldn't weep until they saw the coffins. If they refused to cooperate, kill them. Qin Miaoyu was stunned. All of them? She could tell he wasn't joking. Qin Miaoyu was no bleeding heart, but these wealthy families were part of a complicated web of relationships within Guangqian County. Since the mastermind Yang Yuan was a relative of the emperor, it was possible his collaborators might also have connections at court. It was easy to say, kill them, but if someone went after the Zhejian Bureau for it later, then she, a simple spy, couldn't bear the responsibility. Feng Xiao was in seclusion, and Ming Yue was in a coma. Everyone with decision-making power was absent. Someone of her low rank had no authority to dictate the Zhejiang Bureau's actions. Tsway Boo-qoo fell silent. He too realized it was inappropriate to leave this to Qin Miaoyu. After all, she wasn't the head of the Zhejiang Bureau. Currently, only Tsway Boo-qoo had the rank and status to act. After a disaster like this, plague is bound to follow. Gather all the doctors and recruit the largest pharmacy in the city. Have them prescribe some preventative medication for the refugees and order mugwort burned around the city to dispel the disease. Yang Yuan left us plenty of gold and silver. Deduct the expenses from that first. Keep a record. Zhongting has already reported this matter to the court. When he returns to the capital, he can present the record along with his list of Yang Yuan's crimes. He thought for a moment. After that, go to the villa and find a few corpses, fresh ones. The more gruesome their deaths, the better. It's fine if their faces are damaged. Just choose ones that will scare people with a single glance and give them nightmares if they look again. Qin Miaoyu looked at him strangely. She'd likely never heard such a bizarre request, but she quickly recovered. Quite a few of our enemies died at Feng Yuan Tavern. We can bring them here. That will save us from having to search. Tsway Boo-qoo nodded. That's fine. Lord Chief, Xiao reminded him, it's time for your medicine. The two engaged in a silent standoff, which ended when Tsway Boo-qoo picked up the bowl. Qin Miaoyu quickly left to carry out Tsway Boo-qoo's orders, leaving Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo alone. After hesitating for a long moment, Xiao silently knelt. Tsway Boo-qoo looked surprised. Have you thought it over? Xiao lowered her head. Yes. As long as I can stay in the Zuoya Bureau, this subordinate will remain at your lordship's beck and call. I'm yours to command. Always. They'd had a long talk earlier that day, in which Tsway Boo-qoo had offered her two choices. One was to leave the Zuoya Bureau forever. The other was to stay, but not with him. The Zuoya Bureau had hidden sentry posts all across the land. Xiao would be stationed at one of those and start over. Only after proving herself would she have the chance to be promoted. The latter path was naturally much more difficult. Xiao had been with Tsway Boo-qoo since the establishment of the Zuoya Bureau and was currently a 7th rank official. This demotion effectively returned her to the bottom to start again from scratch. I thought you'd choose to leave behind your official post and be free, Tsway Boo-qoo commanded. It wouldn't be such a bad thing. I want to stay, Xiao insisted. Whatever it takes. The Qingcang sect from which Xiao hailed was small, with mediocre teachings and no secrets worth stealing. The only skill of note was the art of disguise, but even this wasn't particularly impressive. In the face of raw martial power, disguises counted for little. Consequently, the sect had few disciples. Hoping to revitalize it, the new sect leader had married the only daughter of the leader of a large sect to the southeast. She was an arrogant woman, pampered since childhood, and after marrying in, she wasted no time ordering everyone about and meddling wherever she could. Xiaoxian's beauty inevitably drew her ire, and ultimately resulted in her expulsion from the sect. Exiled and with nowhere to go, Xiao received instructions from the 13 floors of Yuanhai that sent her to Chang'an, the capital of the former Zhou dynasty. Per her orders, Xiao waited at the tea house on the outskirts of Chang'an for half a month, exhausting all her remaining money and facing numerous mishaps due to her lovely face. She was left utterly miserable. She had gradually broken away from her small sex mindset and realized there was a larger world out there. Perhaps the 13 floors of Yuanhai had hung her out to dry so she could experience the warmth and coldness of the world, that she might be convinced to submit to them fully. But she never encountered any message from the 13 floors. Instead, she met Tsway Boo-qoo. Tsway Boo-qoo hadn't yet been in charge of the Zuoya Bureau then, though Lady Dugu already trusted him deeply, and he was a guest in the Duke of Sway's residence. Few people knew of him. Xiao had never heard his name. Later, when Tsway Boo-qoo learned of her origins and asked her if she wished to come along with him, she'd vaguely realized that her value to the 13 floors might lie herein. She came from a small sect and had no skills except the art of disguise. Tsway Boo-qoo found people to teach her medicinal science and some ancient texts on disguises for her to learn from. After the Zuoya Bureau was founded, he took her with him as they traveled the world handling cases. Not only did Xiaoxian benefit from receiving Tsway Boo-qoo's direct teachings, she felt needed by the Zuoya Bureau and by Tsway Boo-qoo himself. She thought that she'd found her place and was far more at home than she had ever been in her original sect. Only in the Zuoya Bureau did she feel her heart was beating and alive, that there would always be goals for her to accomplish and someone she could look to for guidance. Later, she was threatened by a messenger from the 13 floors. Xiaoxian was forced to choose between two options, exposing her identity and being cast out of the Zuoya Bureau, or delivering irrelevant messages that wouldn't endanger Tsway Boo-qoo. One misstep led to another, and by the time she tried to turn back, she found her path had already changed beyond recognition. She went to Zhao's tea house determined to die, but unexpectedly, Tsway Boo-qoo had left her a path to life. Your body needs long-term care. Refining the ice fungus pill requires time and labor, and there are a few left. I'll refine a bottle for your lordship before I leave and write down the prescription. The old doctor at Huizi Hall knows the method. You can ask him to refine it for you. Neither her words nor her reluctant actions softened Tsway Boo-qoo's resolve to send her from his side. Everyone must pay a price for their actions. Regardless of the hardships they might have suffered, they should be prepared to bear the consequences of their decisions. Since Xiaoxian had chosen to stay, she had accepted her punishment. In any event, leaving the capital for a secret post might not be the misfortune she thought. Tsway Boo-qoo grunted. As the medicine gradually took effect, his head began to swim. He'd wanted to wait for news from Qin Miaoyu before lying down, but his body was warning him he had reached his limits. All the willpower in the world couldn't counteract his fatigue. Xiaoxian's words grew foggy and confused, as if he heard them through a paper window screen. Even his sleep was restless. Countless dreams came, one after another, whirling through his mind like a revolving lantern. The dead, former enemies, many of whom Tsway Boo-qoo had killed or plotted against, crawled up from the underworld, loathing and resentment wrapped like spider silk around Tsway Boo-qoo's body. They screamed for revenge, demanding his life. But Tsway Boo-qoo had a will of iron and a heart of stone. Even in his dream, he remained impassive as he allowed the evil spirits to spiral around him and howl. He felt as if a massive boulder was tied to his body, dragging him down to the bottom of a deep pool. Cries echoed in his ears, as if trying to call him back. But the nameless force below was too strong. He flattened his hand into a blade and sliced through the silk, strand by strand. But his consciousness was adrift in the sea of his dreamscape, unable to find solid ground. He had no idea how much time had passed when the voices in his ears gradually sharpened and became clear. Xiaoxian was talking, answered by another familiar voice. Tsway Boo-qoo's reflexes were sluggish in the dream. Tsway Boo-qoo frowned and pondered for a long time before realizing the other voice must belong to Pei Jingzhe. The two of them spoke fast and low. It didn't sound like an idle chat. Their voices were tight with unconcealed anxiety. He seemed to hear the words, "My lord," and "Deputy Chief Fung." Suddenly, he heard a short, shrill scream. Tsway Boo-qoo opened his eyes. His heart ached dully at being forced awake. As if tugged by an invisible thread, he felt pain shoot up his injured shoulder. The scream hadn't come from Pei Jingzhe or Xiaoxian, but from the neighboring courtyard. It was the terrified scream of a young woman. Pei Jingzhe rushed over to take a look. Xiaoxian was about to follow when she glanced back and saw Tsway Boo-qoo with his eyes open. She stopped in her tracks and hurried back to help him sit up. What happened? Tsway Boo-qoo had woken too abruptly, and his mind was still slow. Deputy Chief Fung is in seclusion to heal his wounds. Something seems to have gone wrong, Xiaoxian said. Pei Jingzhe had arranged for maidservants to deliver food and water daily to Feng Xiao's quarters, ensuring he would have what he needed upon waking. But while Tsway Boo-qoo had been sleeping during the day, a maid had encountered Feng Xiao, who was supposed to be in seclusion behind closed doors. He'd struck and injured her, and it had taken the combined efforts of Pei Jingzhe, Qin Miaoyu, and the freshly awakened Ming Yue to subdue him. The incident had triggered a qi deviation in Feng Xiao, and he'd fallen into a coma. Tsway Boo-qoo's vacant gaze gradually gained focus. Just now, I thought I heard you talking about the ice fungus pill. What does the pill have to do with this? Qiao Xian instinctively shook her head. Nothing. Your lordship misheard. Tsway Boo-qoo stared at her in silence, and Qiao Xian stared back. Pei Jingzhe knew there was an enormous gap between his own martial arts and Feng Xiao's, but he'd never before felt it so clearly. A hand was squeezing his neck, its grip growing tighter and tighter. Breathing became impossible. At this rate, he'd be meeting the ruler of the underworld any minute. My lord! Pei Jingzhe forced between gritted teeth. Feng Xiao seemed not to hear. His hair was disheveled, and a red mark ran vertically along his brows, a sign that his qi was blocked at the yin-tang point, and his mind was greatly affected. After absorbing the two sarira, his internal strength had increased by leaps and bounds, but his progress had come with a latent danger. Taking shortcuts would always lead to disaster. Feng Xiao hadn't entered qi deviation when fighting Xiao Lü, but that was only due to his extraordinary willpower. Sooner or later, this moment was bound to come. In desperation, Pei Jingzhe raised his palm and struck at Feng Xiao. The blow was instantly deflected. Pei Jingzhe spasmed as his own internal energy rebounded back on him. Deputy Chief Feng's martial skills were no weaker when in qi deviation. On the contrary, his temporary loss of lucidity meant no one could restrain him. Pei Jingzhe could have cried. He deeply regretted not being harsher on Feng Xiao when he'd subdued him the first time with Ming Yue and the others. Who could have imagined his lord would break free of his confinement so quickly? Now, he might not last long enough for the third chief to arrive. By the time he did, Pei Jingzhe would be dead and buried. Wouldn't his lord be sad to realize he'd killed Pei Jingzhe with his own two hands? It's me, Jingzhe. Pei Jingzhe choked out, trying to buy himself time and a chance of survival. He needed Feng Xiao to wake up. The words had no effect. Feng Xiao wasn't in a mindless rage where he was killing people with every strike, but his consciousness was turned inward, lost and chaotic. He was completely oblivious to the outside world. Pei Jingzhe's eyes welled with tears. At the edge of his vision, he caught movement. Ming Yue, Tsway Boo-qoo, and the others had arrived. It was as if a savior from heaven had descended. His eyes lit up. Arlang! Fungar! They were familiar voices. At that moment, Feng Xiao was like an untethered soul. The voices floated in from a distance and entered his ears, but his soul was caught in a tug-of-war with the sarira of the grandmaster it had formed from. His qi was roiling, seeking an exit it couldn't find. He could spare them no attention. All he could do was allow his body to follow its instincts and fight. The voices grew slower and closer. Only then did they start to register. Ming Yue? And that Tsway fellow? Feng Xiao sighed and looked at the faint apparition in front of him. Not far away, a tall man with a beard and mustache stood opposite him, his hands behind his back. His face oozed arrogance, as if nothing in the world was worthy of his attention. The owner of the two sarira, Cui Buqu, former grandmaster of the demonic sects. I knew it, Feng Xiao thought. How could Xiao Lü be so generous as to give the sarira away for nothing? He was waiting for this. Such treasures were not meant to be possessed by ordinary people. If Feng Xiao hadn't come from a demonic sect and trained in the martial arts, he'd be facing more than just a qi deviation right now. His body might have exploded, killing him instantly. Pei Jingzhe had no idea what drastic transformations Feng Xiao was experiencing within. He only knew that the hand grip in his throat relaxed minutely at the sound of Tsway Boo-qoo's voice. Ming Yue seized the opportunity to step forward and seal Feng Xiao's acupoints. With the help of Qin Miaoyu, he supported Feng Xiao's feverish body as he collapsed again. Pei Jingzhe had faithfully served at Feng Xiao's side for so long, yet he couldn't compare to this man who'd known him less than a year. The thought made him deeply unhappy. Before he could dwell on it, he heard Ming Yue say gravely, "We can't let this go on. We must find a supply of ice fungus. It's the only thing that can help our Long through this crisis." "The deputy chief is suffering from qi deviation," Qin Miaoyu said, puzzled. "What good is medicine? Shouldn't we work together to channel him qi?" Ming Yue smiled bitterly. "Absolutely not. He doesn't lack qi right now. His qi is about to explode. He can't rely on anyone but himself to regulate his meridians. The ice fungus can't change his situation, but it can help." Qin Miaoyu sighed, her brow creasing. "That may be more difficult than you think. I checked at every pharmacy in the city earlier. Either they haven't heard of it, or their knowledge is half complete, and they just say it's hard to find. Only the major pharmacies in the capital stock it. We'll never get it in time." "You don't have to go to the capital," said Tsway Boo-qoo. "I have some right here." Xiao Shan's eyes widened in alarm. Before she could object, Tsway Boo-qoo pulled out a porcelain bottle. He poured out the last 3 pills, pried open Feng Xiao's mouth, and stuffed them inside, then closed its jaw and forced him to swallow. Chapter 152. Feng Xiao paid no mind to the outside world. He was locked in a vicious battle, one no less dangerous than the fight in the tavern. Tsway Wang's 2 Sarira seemed to harbor all the pridefulness of their former master, refusing to be absorbed or assimilated. After lying dormant for several weeks and feigning submission, they'd finally taken the opportunity to launch a counterattack while Feng Xiao was heavily injured. It was exactly what one would expect from a member of the demonic sex. Fortunately, Feng Xiao had been wise enough to guess Xiao Lü wouldn't give such precious Sarira away without a catch. He'd kept a portion of his guard up all this time. Otherwise, he'd have already been embroiled with the invader and ultimately destroyed himself. For the mighty deputy chief of the Zhejian Bureau, leader of the Fajing sect, to die from a qi deviation, it was only slightly better than choking to death on his dinner. He'd become a famous laughingstock in Jianghu history. What's more, Feng Xiao was elegant, peerless, radiant, dazzling, show-stealing, unique. If he died like this, wouldn't the world suffer a terrible loss, deprived of such a priceless treasure? Okay. An expression of pure contempt, neither pleased nor angry. It resembled the mighty drums of the thunder beast's hide made by the Yellow Emperor himself, resounding for thousands of miles. When this sound reached Feng Xiao's ears, he felt his foggy mind quake, his already chaotic qi disrupted further. Feng Xiao looked at the wavering shadow in front of him. It wasn't the former Grandmaster Tsway Wang in truth. It was only his echo, which Feng Xiao's mind had conjured up thanks to the Sarira. Yet, in another sense, it was the last trace of Tsway Wang left in the realm of the living. Like a fish that had been killed, then served at the table, Feng Xiao thought maliciously. Steamed, braised in vinegar, or fried. One couldn't say it was gone, but it turned it from a living creature into someone else's meal. The demonic sects believed in the survival of the fittest. They seldom honored their predecessors. The only thing they worshipped was strength. But Feng Xiao was not a native disciple of the demonic sects. Even his position as leader of the Fajing sect was one he'd reluctantly accepted and haphazardly managed. He was much more enthusiastic about his role in the Zhejian Bureau. Since childhood, he had been gifted and favored. Everything he desired was within reach. He'd breezed through martial training others bled for. But because of this, he was comparatively less fixated on it. He had put his full focus on this path. With his talent, he'd have had far more achievements than he already did. As a consequence, this leader of the Fajing sect respected the demonic sect's preceding grandmasters even less than usual. Standing on the brink of life and death, he still spared a moment to ridicule them. Met with this frivolous attitude, Tsway Wang didn't say a word. He sneered and struck. He surged forward with overwhelming force, catching Feng Xiao off guard. Killing intent choked the air, winding around Feng Xiao strand by strand like the silk of a cocoon, tight and impenetrable. Tsway Wang captured every stream of qi Feng Xiao unleashed before it could have any effect. He had a counter to every attack. He started slow, then turned ferocious. Feng Xiao's mind, his last line of defense, was swept away by the intensity of the attack. His consciousness flickered, his body no longer under his control. You dare call yourself a successor to the demonic sex with only this level of ability? A rough voice echoed in Feng Xiao's ear, startling him. He instinctively moved to counterattack, but found himself unable to harness his qi, as if an unseen force was pinning him down. Only now did he realize he'd underestimated his predecessor. Anyone capable of leaving such a glorious mark on the demonic sex legacy couldn't be any less talented than himself. The consequences of his carelessness might very well be his life. Feng Xiao finally didn't dare fool around anymore. But he was terribly weary. After the battle at Feng Yuan Tavern, in which he'd killed nearly a dozen experts, both renowned and newcomers alike, he'd fought Xiao Lü, who was practically his equal in strength. He'd exhausted all his energy and struggled just to hobble back. He was beyond fatigued. Yet now he was denied rest even when healing, forced to fight another match. Feng Xiao sorted and gathered the many streams of qi, then mobilized them to fight back against the phantom of Tsway Boo-qoo trying to engulf him. But his foe had lain in ambush for many days and was well prepared. As they clashed, Feng Xiao's qi was instantly weakened by a third, while his foe remained as solid and unmoved as Mount Tai. He cast Feng Xiao a mocking glance. Trash, he heard Tsway Boo-qoo say. In life, you fought the 6 most powerful grandmasters in the world. I defeated them with ease and walked away unscathed. The demonic sects grow weaker with every generation. If an incompetent like you had shown up when I was still around, forget entering Zhu Yue's sect. I'd have struck you dead at the mountain gates. Feng Xiao gasped for breath as his opponent's overwhelming qi poured down on his head, creating a pressure so immense his own qi nearly buckled. He felt he was about to collapse into dust and fragments. Within the illusory realm of his consciousness, he staggered back several steps. His limbs felt leaden, as if they were tied to heavy boulders. He was unable to raise so much as a finger. Opposite him, Tsway Boo-qoo laughed again, cold and mocking. I advise you to give up now. Did the 6 grandmasters attack you all at once, or separately? Feng Xiao asked. It was a strange experience. The figure that stood before Feng Xiao appeared to be Tsway Boo-qoo, but in fact, it was the 2 sarira he'd left behind. Condensed remnants of his life's martial arts and the lingering fragments of his consciousness. Thanks to this, 2 people who should never have met in life shared an encounter that transcended time and space. Tsway Boo-qoo snorted coldly. Of course it was all at once. Then you're lying. Even if you were the strongest martial artist back then, it's impossible for you to handle 6 martial arts grandmasters at the same time. Fool! Tsway Boo-qoo shouted. Do you think the strongest of my era were capable to the half-hearted masters you're producing now? If my venerable self wishes to kill you, I can do it as easily as crushing an ant. Then go ahead. Feng Xiao appeared unconcerned. Don't hold back. Who knows? Maybe you'll seize my body like one of those deities and reincarnate as a human. I left behind 2 sarira. How do you know I can't? Tsway Boo-qoo asked darkly. Feng Xiao laughed. Because that's why you're hesitating. Destroy me, and you'll destroy yourself too. And you can't bear to do that. After all these years, though you're just a sarira, you still possess some of the consciousness Tsway Boo-qoo left behind. You finally found someone to spar and talk with. How can you bear to destroy me? The figure trembled slightly, as if Feng Xiao had struck a nerve, and now it was reconsidering. Feng Xiao would never let go of a chance to destroy an enemy, even if the man in front of him was a legendary master from his own sect. He didn't hesitate to launch a counterattack. Sir! Pei Jingzhe looked on in horror as Feng Xiao's body shuddered, blood trickling from his mouth and nose. Feng Xiao's eyes were squeezed shut. He couldn't hear Pei Jingzhe's shouts. His complexion, which had been a pallid green, now began to turn faintly yellow, embodying that classic simile used to describe the dead. a face like a gold leaf. Gold was a beautiful color, but if a martial arts practitioner showed such a complexion, death was nigh. After swallowing the 3 ice fungus pills, Feng Xiao's color had improved slightly, but just when everyone thought his condition was improving, it took a sudden turn for the worse. Ming Yue had said Feng Xiao was fighting desperately against his inner demons. There were only 2 possible outcomes of such a battle. If he succeeded, he'd live. If he failed, he'd die. Tsway Boo-qoo stood quietly for a moment before turning to leave, prepared to deal with his own pressing business. Had he not given Feng Xiao his own emergency pills, and had Xiao Xian's expression not been so grave, Pei Jingzhe might have thought Tsway Boo-qoo didn't care a whit if Feng Xiao died. That maybe he was even secretly glad. Today, the proud and infallible Deputy Chief Fung might truly falter. Pei Jingzhe sighed to himself. In his eyes, Feng Xiao was practically omnipotent. He refused to entertain such a possibility. He didn't dare touch Feng Xiao. His skin burned like fire, and the slightest contact could lead to unexpected consequences. "If your lordship wakes up, we can discuss docking my pay again," Pei Jingzhe said through gritted teeth, his heart aching. He thought for a while and added silently, "Doesn't your lordship love making things difficult for Cui Xianzhang? If something happens to you, the court will send someone else to manage the Zhejiang Bureau, and Cui Xianzhang will quickly forget his old rival." He didn't know if any of his words would touch Feng Xiao's heart. The 2 streams of qi within Feng Xiao were entwined in a life-or-death showdown, locked in a stalemate. Cui Wang's qi swept toward Feng Xiao like a cresting wave, yet Feng Xiao blocked it before it could break. Feng Xiao wasn't merely defending. He sought any opportunity to counterattack, cunningly waiting to strike. Cui Wang was furious. "You rat! You don't deserve to call yourself a member of the demonic sects." "Do you really fancy yourself, Cui Wang?" Feng Xiao asked. "You're just 2 Sarira he left behind after the death of his body and soul when he failed in his climb to the martial summit. Even if the real Cui Wang stood before me, I'd still tell him." In the depths of Feng Xiao's mind, it was perfectly clear to him that this so-called Cui Wang was just a phantom created by the qi deviation. Maybe the phantom really had inherited Cui Wang's qi, but ultimately, it was an outside invader incompatible with Feng Xiao's martial arts. If he couldn't force this qi into submission and make it his own, what awaited him was a fate identical to Cui Wang's. This was likely the most dangerous challenge he'd faced in his martial training, but Feng Xiao had always grown stronger with each challenge he met. He had never known compromise or surrender. Maybe there was someone out there who could force him to concede, but it certainly wouldn't be here or now. That there's always a higher sky, and always a better man. With these bold words, Feng Xiao surged forward and hemmed Cui Wang in from the front and rear. After biding his time and regulating his breathing, he was officially ready to declare war on the enemy. Cui Wang roared with rage. He too fought without hesitation. A violent tremor went through Feng Xiao as a dazzling light erupted before him. He felt as if his whole body was burning, his blood boiling, yearning to burst the confines of his skin and explode outward. His veins twisted and turned, washing him in waves of agony like the tossing sea. After an indeterminate amount of time, the pain and turmoil finally subsided. Feng Xiao slowly opened his eyes. Cui Wang had vanished. The phantom was nowhere to be found. Feng Xiao's body felt warm and languid both inside and out. It was the feeling of defeating his enemy. So wonderful his muscles, bones, blood, and flesh groaned in comfort. Before him was a stretch of luxuriant green, like a field of newly planted seedlings, a swaying bamboo grove, or a pond layered in lotus leaves, gently soothing away his fatigue after the fierce battle. A figure stood in the middle of the dense green, smiling at him. Feng Xiao twitched his fingers, and the man came to him. His sickly face was familiar. He met Feng Xiao's eyes but said nothing, letting Feng Xiao's fingers brush over his face and open his collar, revealing skin that spent years away from the sun. Tsway Boo-qoo touched Feng Xiao's wrist and sighed softly. "Xiao Lü is dead." Feng Xiao was momentarily stunned. "How did he die?" He was seriously injured after your battle, Tsway Boo-qoo said. Ming Yue led his people in pursuit and killed him. So the bandit leader has met his end, and the 13 floors are a headless dragon, Feng Xiao said in relief. They won't make trouble for us again. Tsway Boo-qoo smiled faintly. And it's all thanks to you. Of course, I'll request the Emperor recognize your accomplishments. Feng Xiao also smiled. You don't need to make any request. I just want you to do one thing. He lifted Tsway Boo-choo's chin, and a soft flush rose on that pale cheek. Tsway Boo-qoo seemed to want to step back, but unusually, he stayed put with a look of forbearance that was very fetching. Feng Xiao dipped his head to kiss him, then paused. Tsway Boo-qoo looked up at him, bewildered. Feng Xiao sneered. So you can even peek at my inner demons and confuse me? Not bad. His fingers curled, mercilessly closing around Tsway Boo-choo's throat. He squeezed, and in an instant, Tsway Boo-choo crumbled to dust. How did you realize? His enemy's voice drifted into his ears, faint and tinged with grudging defeat. Feng Xiao laughed. All you can conjure is the Tsway Boo-choo in my fantasies. The real Tsway Boo-choo would never say it was all thanks to me. Throughout this duel of both wits and strength, he'd begun to understand the rules of this dreamscape and fashioned an additional fantasy in a corner of his mind. Sure enough, the snake had emerged from its lair and fallen into his trap. It felt as if a dust-covered table had been wiped clean. His soul was again pure and bright. His roiling tea slowly calmed, then quietly began to gather once more. Great sounds come in whispers. Great forms possess no shape. Really quick footnote of the lines just read. This is from Chapter 41 of Tao Te Ching, one of the 2 foundational texts of Taoism attributed to Lao Tzu. Returning to the reading. Feng Xiao discovered that, by chance, his martial arts seemed to have advanced yet again. Tsway Wang, you've lost. Every seat in the guest hall of the governor's residence was filled, yet the silence was deafening. Almost all the prominent households in the county had received an invitation they couldn't refuse. When Zhongqing's missive had arrived at the Li family residence, the patriarch had begged illness and sent an unfavored son out to deal with it. He hadn't expected the guards who came knocking to drag him, ill or not, from his bed and bring him here. The Li family was only the start. The Ding, Zhao, Wang, and others had undergone the same treatment. Everyone sat in silence, resolute in their strategy of passive resistance. No matter what Zhongqing said, they refused to speak. After all, the main culprits behind the embezzlement were Yang Yuan, Li Yan, and Wu Yi, and they'd already been arrested. The families here had only assisted them under duress, and Tsway Boo-choo had said those who had merely followed orders would be forgiven. Zhongqing didn't dare put any of the prominent families in the county to death for this. Zhongqing had taken the time to have a word with him before Tsway Boo-choo arrived. After all, soft words and courtesy should come first, reproof and punishment later. He tried appealing to reason and sentiment. He explained that the imperial granaries had no more grain to send, but that if the victims grew desperate and violent, the first people they'd turn on would be the families present. That this was a matter that concerned everyone's safety. He pleaded for them to keep the bigger picture in mind. He spoke so earnestly for so long that he felt as though his throat was smoking when he finished. But those stubborn old tortoises refused to budge. They hid like quails in the grass, not a one of them willing to step forward. Zhongqing was livid with fury. At last, even he ran out of patience. He slammed a hand on the table and instructed Pei Jingzhi to read from the account book Li Yan had provided. Which family had benefited the most from the tax exemption policy? Everything was recorded in black and white. No one could avoid their responsibilities. If they continued to stall, fine. Zhongqing had all day. The patriarch of the Li family was first to speak. Censor Zhong is an intelligent man. Governor Yang made many grand promises when the tax exemption policy was introduced, but in practice, we received only a fraction more grain compared to previous years. After the flood this year, the grain was entirely depleted. We're all going hungry. Where are we supposed to find the extra grain to feed the refugees? If your lordship doesn't believe us, take someone and conduct a search. Obviously, he wasn't afraid of what Zhongqing might find. If Zhongqing's search turned up empty, these same people would use their connections in the court to file a complaint against him for abusing his position. Zhongqing had seen the tragic state of the refugees after the flood, and he now hated these people even more. He yearned to send someone to turn all their manners upside down. It was then that Tsway Boo-qoo arrived. He came without fanfare and without anyone to accompany him. He held a small hand warmer, and his cloak was wrapped tightly around him as he walked soundlessly through the courtyard to reach the gates. He coughed a few times, which brought some color to his cheeks, pallid from the cold. With the exception of Zhongqing and Pei Jingjie, everyone's faces went rigid, as if they'd spotted a great enemy. Some of the young men glanced at him furtively. The Zhuoye bureau chief didn't return their glances. He looked straight ahead as he walked to the seat of honor and settled himself, his brow etched with weariness and his thin lips pale. From the side, they appeared to curl slightly upward in something like a smile, yet not, as if, at any moment, he might make someone suffer until they wished for death. The patriarch of the Li family felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. He shut his mouth with a snap and resumed his quail act. But Tsway Boo-qoo didn't ask him any questions. Instead, he said, "Before we begin, please invite Governor Yang over. I'd like to have a talk with him." Oh my God. Oh, we're done with volume 4. So, I'm going to start at the top of my notes. The first thing that I want to say is I think seeing Tsway Boo-qoo in these chapters when they finally caught Yang Yuan was probably a glimpse at his true coldness. Even though we've seen him like deliver orders and stuff before, there's always something different when you do something yourself. And I'm referring to him striking Yang Yuan with the brick. And then turning around and being like, well, it would be against the law for me to strike you as punishment. So, Yang Yuan, why did you run into the wall and hit your head? So cold. But it was funny. Cold-blooded bastard. I love it though. Next, it was nice to have cleared up who these three Feng Xiao were. So there was Feng Xiao, then there was Qin Miaoyu, and Ming Yue, which if you guys don't remember, Qin Miaoyu was the one they caught like in the very beginning of the series who had the Jade of Heaven Lake, and she even used a little bit of it, and Feng Xiao took it from her, but ended up not killing her because he thought she was actually very resourceful. And all this time, you know, I'd been, well, not all this time, I kind of forgot about her at some point, but for a while I did wonder like what happened to her, where did she go, what did he do with her. So now we know she's officially part of the Jiejian Bureau, which is pretty cool. Next thing, obviously, we have to go back to page 337, because what happened there? We had our beautiful, but not really, at least according to Feng Xiao, I don't know. We had our beloved Tsway Boo-qoo decide that he was going to send Pei Jingjie, well, really, he sent Xiao Shan, but he knew Pei Jingjie would follow, to the Zhao Tea house while he went to where the actual battle was, where he went out to the danger, which he absolutely did not have to do, and it was completely unexpected for Feng Xiao. So the question that Feng Xiao had asked Tsway Boo-qoo the day before was, would you entrust your back to me? You know, basically, would you trust me to protect you? Would you trust me to have your back? So Tsway Boo-qoo came and said, my answer is, I would. Oh my God. I squealed inwardly. I don't remember what I did during the actual recording, but oh my God. I was so freaking happy to hear him like finally say that. to say something encouraging, nice, whatever you want to call it, to Feng Xiao, because he's always been snappy toward him. And, like even Feng Xiao was like, can you at least, just one time say something that doesn't allude to you wanting me to die? So anyway, the other thing that I want to say is, what am I note? Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed reading about Feng Xiao's breakthrough, essentially, or kind of, sort of. I'm not sure I would call it a breakthrough, but when he was fighting with Xiao Lü, when he had the realization about the martial arts being constrained and confined and stuff, I just really liked the wording of that, and I can't wait to go back and listen to myself reading this so that I can hear it again, because I was like, oh, it was just worded beautifully. So I have to give props to Meng Xi Shi and, hold on, and Faelicy? I'm actually not sure how we pronounce the translator's name, but I'm gonna say it's Faelicy, because they wrote it beautifully. I appreciate it very, very much. And the next thing, obviously, we have to talk about the kiss. Actually, there really isn't much to say. I'm sorry. Before I go to the kiss, I'm all over the place, you guys. Please excuse me. I am suffering from a bit of sleep deprivation. On page 345, when Xiao Lü was basically like, you came here and you really didn't have to, my guy. Like, is it worth it? And Tsway Boo-qoo mouthed, worth it. My heart. This is like Tsway Boo-qoo peak. I don't know. Okay, now we can go to the kisses. Right, so, God, my heart. I was so happy when they kissed. Finally. And then it was just so funny because Tsway Boo-qoo, it was like for a minute, he forgot to resist. Specifically, if you want to go back to that was on page 362. But yeah, it said, Tsway Boo-qoo opened his eyes slightly and momentarily forgot to resist. That was so funny. I was like, good. I'm glad you forgot to resist because you really just want to kiss him anyway. So give in, dude. But on a more serious note, something that Ming Yue had mentioned was the fact that they are, under the emperor versus the empress. The Zuo Bureau is under the empress and the Zhejiang Bureau is under the emperor. And they're they're basically both there to keep each other in check. And so, yeah, them getting together poses a problem. So I'm like, okay, yeah, would this have to be a secret relationship? But at the same time, I feel like I wouldn't be happy with that. Not at all. Because Feng Xiao, while I'm sure, of course, he can keep secrets and keep information, he doesn't seem like the type who would want to hide his relationship with someone. Like, he would probably flaunt it. I feel like Tsway Boo-qoo would probably have no issue at all pretending like he doesn't have a relationship with this man. But I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see in book 5 because I really want to know just how their relationship is going to develop with regard to their positions. The next thing I want to say is that I had mentioned it earlier, but I just want to mention it again, and coming from after getting more knowledge when I wrote my notes, is that I'm so glad that, number one, Tsway Boo-qoo sent Xiao Xian to the tea house to protect her, but I'm also glad that Xiao Xian made her choice, to be faithful to him, to not be undercover anymore. At least I'm hoping that's going to be the case. For real, I'm sure it is. And then I'm glad that he also gave her another chance. And of course, she has to face the consequences of her actions. But he's like, I mean, you can just leave the Tsway Bureau if you want, or you can start over. But over there. Because, of course, he's not entrusting his back to her. And so, I was just glad that he showed her mercy. Because, sometimes people do things, they wrong you. And it sucks. But there are people who truly do deserve another chance, and I think Xiao Xian is one of those people. So next, I was moved. Tsway Boo-qoo has really just been moving me. He really has. But I was so moved when the medicine, the icy fungus, whatever it was called, that was supposed to be for him because he was all messed up, that he went ahead and gave it to Feng Xiao without even a question. It wasn't hesitation or anything like that. He was just like, no need to go to the capital. I got it. And then boop, 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 popped them in his mouth. And then Xiao Shan's like, sir, with her facial expression. I know she was so over it. Like, why do I even bother? But of course she needs to bother, at least until she's gone. So yeah, my heart was very, very moved by that. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was Feng Xiao's T deviation and this struggle with the inner Sarira, these inner demons of Tsway Boo-qoo, these last little embers of this man left, which if you have the book and you look on page 384 where you see the picture of Tsway Boo-qoo, that's all I'll say. This battle that he's having, first of all, is perfectly logical for him to be having, because you are taking in essentially the essence of someone else who was a demonic cultivator. And so it makes sense that he would have this weak moment and having to fight for his life, essentially. But I just think it's funny because one of the things that Tsway Boo-qoo had pointed out before, in knowing when Feng Xiao really was serious about something and he couldn't spare anything, was when he was like silent when he was fighting. But he had mentioned that that Feng Xiao likes to needle his opponents. He likes to get on their nerves, to grind their gears with his words. And so it was just funny to see him doing that to the essence of Tsway Boo-qoo, because that essentially is what he needed to do to get him to falter somewhat and then eventually just be defeated. So, my brain is tired. I need a nap, but I have work to do. Anyway, that is it, you guys. I thoroughly enjoyed this volume. This might be my favorite volume. I don't know. I recently read volume 3 again in order to prepare for volume 4. When I was switching from Devil Venerable Also Wants to Know to Peerless, I had to get used to the voices and everything again. And that one was good. But I think this volume is probably the best. And one of the things that I appreciate about it greatly is the fighting. The fighting in this one has been so freaking good, so detailed, and I'm here for it. Y'all know, because I've mentioned before in Thousand Autumns, I love me some good fight scenes. So that made me very happy. Anyway, I won't ramble on because I already feel like these notes this time are a little scatterbrained and slow and everything because I'm so exhausted. But I hope you all enjoyed volume 4, but specifically enjoyed these chapters. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comment section. I can't wait to interact with you guys and be sad with you guys. Except for those of you who come to my channel later, like in October or something, and then you just get this and volume 5 as well. I envy you. I just want you to know that. And someone commented on one of my videos the other day because they had finished volume 3 and now they have volume 4 to listen to. And they were like, I'm so glad I came late. And I was like, yeah, my past self envies you. Anyway, I'm rambling because I'm tired. I love you guys. No, well, I mean, bye.